Today we will briefly focus on the workforce, and I hope that my story about the Georgian context and the story of Jan will give you some inspiration and then work further and to have that high quality ECEC. So what we think that which is the strongest opportunity is that you have a new national ECEC standard, and this can really be a driving force for quality in ECEC. Having a standard is already one step in the good direction, and we think that these standards are the content is very broad, which means that it focuses on the holistic child. It has child-led initiatives, so we really appreciate the content, but also the way it is set up together. It's scientifically based. It was together with practitioners and with experts all over the field. So we really believe that it can be a very strong start for having quality in ECEC. However, in our research, or in the research we did together with UNICEF, we found that it is not implemented yet, and one of the most important things can be, of course, initial training and continuous professional development to really make these new standards a livable or lively instrument for quality. So what are the main challenges that we have found? That Jan said it already, the staff in preschools, the qualifications of the staff is very, very low. And especially when you have to have high quality ECEC, the staff is crucial. So if you have high qualified staff, then you will have high quality ECEC. And for example, we saw that in 13 municipalities, none of the staff members had a bachelor degree in ECEC. And we also saw that some people or some members of the staff have had initial training, but it was very long time ago, like 20 or 25 years ago. So what's always also striking is that the teachers weren't really prepared for the job, and that there is no link between theory and practice. Also, another challenge is that coping with diversity or with parental involvement is not really an aspect in the initial training. When you have low qualified staff, you should really work on continuous professional development, and there we see that there is a lack of mentoring or a lack of coaching, also a lack of child-free hours. In some municipalities there are child-free hours, but they are not really used for team reflection and reflect together with colleagues about the quality in ECEC. And also very striking is the limited financial resources. When you look at workforce, we see that the preschool educators, they are really low paid. When we see the numbers, it's only 1/3 of what a regular or a normal member or staff member should earn, so it's really, really low. So what are our recommendations? First of all, this initial training, this should be really based on the standards, on the competence profile. There should be attention for to qualify non-qualified workforce, and also very important is that the leaders get enough of support to become really leaders of a team, and to have all the members of a staff to strengthen them, to give them a vision, to provide them with the right resources in all kind of ways. So what is important? I think Jan gave already a lot of inspiration from the other countries, but we think here in Georgia it's very important that there should be a link between theory and practice, that there should be in the initial training a focus on the holistic child, and that staff should work or should learn how to work in the context of diversity, so that accessibility, for example, should be accessibility for all Georgian children. Another important aspect is parental involvement, that parents are really seen as one of the crucial members. So if you see raising children, you have of course the child, you have the staff, but you also have these parents, and there should be a mutual trust between all of these in the triangle. What's also important for us is that there should be time that students should learn how to reflect. Reflection is not something that you can do in 1 minute, but it's something that students should learn, and you can use a lot of instruments to provide or to stimulate reflection with students. And also evaluation and monitoring shouldn't be seen as something that is extra or should only higher the workload, but it should be really seen as a part of a qualitative system in ECEC. For the continuous professional development, it's really important that there are pedagogical coaches who really stimulate all team members and all staff members to think about the work they are doing. And therefore, child-free hours are an important tool, so people can reflect in team and they can focus on also supervision. So I think I had to keep it very short, and I hope there is still some time for questions. So maybe Jan, we can answer the questions together. So I don't know if there are any questions.
We did
the research. It was together with UNICEF and NIAC. We had actually our research contained of 3 main parts. So last year Jan was here and he visited a lot of ECEC centers, and you also had interviews and focus groups with members all over Georgia. And then we had a second part. It was a survey with members of the municipalities. There were 69 members, so there were 64, and then in 5 municipalities there were 2 people who collaborated in the research. And then the third aspect, there were focus groups. There were 22 focus groups, and in total 124 people who were in the focus groups, and it was people from all different levels. Also parents were involved in these focus groups. So these were the 3 main parts of the research, and Jan and I, we provided support to NIAC, and they did the focus groups, they did the first analysis, and then we did the second analysis on these results.
I think, and that's the theme of this morning a bit, that the initial training is really crucial. It's impossible to create a high quality early childhood sector without a good initial training, because the people have no ideas what they are doing. So you have from generation to generation, they are saying, okay, that's a good practice, and what you are doing is there is duplicating a kind of a mediocre practice all the time, and you really need an initial training and continuous professional development for the ones who are now working. So it must be clear that we are not saying that you have to fire all those educators. You have to work with educators who are here. You have to give them continuous professional development. But for the new ones, they have to follow a good training on university level.
Thank you. I loved your focus on child-free hours. My question is, what do you mean by coaching? Can you explain a bit what do you mean by pedagogical coaching?
Yeah. I will say it very concretely. It's somebody, it can be an external person or it can be an internal if you have a quite large preschool and who is coming into the teams. And for instance, you have you start from a case study. For instance, there is a problem with a parent, and you discuss about what the problems of the parent are and what the parents are saying, and then you ask to the different educators how did you react it, and then what was the reaction of the parents, and so you try to change practice and to come to new pedagogical practice. That's it, and that is coming out of the. We did. I don't know if you already have done that in the human science, but we worked with for the Eurofound study with systematic review and we did a research on the websites of the Web of Science and in many different languages to all research that has been done on the effect of courses, continuous professional development, and mentoring and coaching. And what we are seeing is that if you follow just a course of 1 or 2 days, it can be interesting for the person because they can get new ideas about practice, but they don't, if they go next day back to their institution, they don't implement it. And the only continuous professional development that has an impact on practice and also on the development of the child, because there are studies who are measuring the impact on the outcomes of the children, that is that person that is coming to work in the teams with the practitioners. And in some, for instance, in Croatia, in Slovenia, and also in Serbia, for instance, they have already a very long tradition in coaching. So it depends upon country. It's not only the Western countries who are doing. Also, some former communist countries have a long tradition in coaching. And for the moment, it's especially the Italians. We have in the city we're coming from, Ghent, there is also already 40 years of experience. And you see that with a long time coaching, you can have the same effect of a high level of initial training, and that is proven by the Italian, and also in our own city in Ghent we have the same situation.
And I think that if you want to know more about the study, it will be on the UNICEF website, and Anna, you will be on television as well this afternoon. So.
რეალურად კვლევებმა ჩვენა კიდევ ერთხელ რომ საუნივერსიტეტო განათლება და ზოგადად ცოდნა არის პირველი აუცილებელი ნაბიჯი ნებისმიერი ცვლილების მისაღწევად და ეხლა მაქვს განსაკუთრებული პატივი რომ სივრცე დისკუსიისთვის, ლექციისთვის დაუთმო პროფესორ სიმა გერბერს, რომელიც ჩვენთან ერთად იყო ბოლო 10 დღის მანძილზე. ის უძღვებოდა საზაფხულო სკოლას კომუნიკაციური უნარების განვითარებასთან დაკავშირებით აუტიზმის სპექტრის მქონე ბავშვებთან და ეს იყო ნამდვილად ძალიან ნაყოფიერი და ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანი საზაფხულო სკოლა და დღევანდელი მოხსენებაც ასევე ეთმობა ზუსტად ამ კომუნიკაციაზე ორიენტირებულ მოდელს აუტიზმის სპექტრის მქონე ბავშვების შემთხვევაში.
Actually, much of what's been said about early education, I think, is going to resonate with what I have to say about language and communication, particularly for children with autism. And I could say, which is really pretty amazing, that there are a lot of familiar faces in the audience. Since I've spent 10 days here with a lovely group of students and participants who were all very enthusiastic, I would say, about learning more about language and communication models and learning more about contemporary views of working with children with autism. So, as usual, and Sarah and Rachel and I discussed, we prepare way too much. So I'm going to try to see if I can condense basically what I said in 10 days. I'm going to see if I can say in an hour and a half. And the good news is that for part of the audience, at least, it will be very familiar. So I think the students who were in the class will feel very good that about how much they learned. I did want to set the stage, and I think this kind of relates to what has just been said in some ways. There are guidelines, obviously, in every field. And when we talk about language and communication, we really have to start talking about child development in general. And that's the place to begin. And I think some of the things that have been specified by best practice, for example, from the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child, set the stage for what I'm going to say and also for Sarah and Rachel's talk later today. So first, just 5 points here. Young children experience their world as an environment of relationships. And these relationships affect virtually all aspects of their development. So it's kind of interesting to remember that this is science, you know. This isn't somebody's good wishes about children, that they all have relationships. This is science, which has been proven, and I think we see also from the previous speakers, that certain things have been found to be productive in the development of children, in their healthy development and in their learning development. And relationships is the place we want to begin. Children who develop warm, positive relationships with their kindergarten teachers are more excited about learning, more positive about coming to school, more self-confident, and achieve more in the classroom. That's not about whether the teacher teaches this way or that way. This is about the relationship with the teacher. And, you know, in a way, what's kind of freeing about this is everybody can work harder or easily on developing their ability to have relationships with children, deep and meaningful relationships with children. And especially if you know that that's where learning begins, then more so than the cognitive aspects of pre-academic skills. This is a very exciting proposal, I think, and relevant to everybody. Contrary to common assumptions, scientific evidence, and I keep saying scientific, is very important because sometimes there are different views about what's science. And the science of child development is a science. So scientific evidence shows that the influence of relationships on development continues throughout the lifespan. So we always have the opportunity to build on that. And when viewed as an important part of a child's environment, early childhood education must strive to involve young children in reciprocal learning interactions with teachers and peers rather than isolated pre-academic work. It should capitalize on the child's natural interests, the intrinsic drive to learn, rather than following an adult-determined agenda. So we're so in sync with the previous talk. That's very unexpected. Not that I knew what you were going to talk about, but anyhow, it's very lovely that it is in sync. And stated simply, young children learn best in an interactive relational mode rather than through an education model that focuses on rote instruction. So this information plus some models that I'm going to mention briefly has informed my work. I'm a professor of speech-language pathology at Queens College, and I'm also a speech-language pathologist clinician working with children with autism. And maybe a third thing is I'm trying to always help develop frameworks for what is the best way to think about the intervention that we do. How do we use what we know about typical development and put it together with the challenges that are faced by children with autism and somehow have a good place to land, okay? So the first developmental principle then is the power of loving relationships. Even though I'm a speech-language pathologist, I'm interested in placing the understanding of language and communication, again, in the larger context of what's known about infant mental health, about the relationship between babies and their parents or caregivers. This is from the work of Alicia Lieberman, that moments of particular connectedness characterized by mirroring and intense shared affect are not merely growth promoting, but become an integral part of a child's identity. So this is, if this is true, which I believe it's true, for children who are typically developing, it must be true for children who are atypically developing, because human children are human children, right? And even though the challenges that the child with autism might face interfere to some extent, and not that his caregiver isn't trying, of course, 150%, but because of the challenges that the child comes to the world with, some of this may get derailed. And it's our responsibility to look at that derailment in the context of typical development, obviously, my opinion. The importance of caregiver emotional availability and empathy in helping an infant and a young child to regulate affect and organize internal experience cannot be minimized. Why am I starting with this? Because I believe this is where we start for children with autism. It's not one set of, it's not one science for the child development of typically developing children and a different science for the development of children with autism. This quote I put in every single talk I've ever given by Brofenbrenner. In order to develop normally, a child requires progressively more complex joint activity with one or more adults who have an irrational emotional relationship with the child. See, irrational. In other words, somebody's got to be crazy about that kid. That's number one. First, last, and always. And I think that's absolutely true of every child we work with that has a challenge. I won't go into the long discussion we had over the last 2 weeks about what about professional distance and objectivity and all of that. Okay, you have to know your boundaries, but you can still love the kid. And the kid could still feel loved by you. And I think that's perfectly within the purview of science, as long as you know your boundaries. There's very interesting work by Bill Singletary. And this is thinking about what have those altered interactions that occurred between the autistic child and the caregiver. What is the result of that? So when you look at children with autism, what are some of the contributing factors, obviously, besides the child coming to the world biologically and organically with whatever challenges he had? But in this work, Singletary says, because the child has not had what I was just talking about, not because of any fault on the caregiver's part, because of the child's biological differences, then the child will respond to the world and experience the world with more psychological and biological stress, which we know is true because we know that children are anxious, we know they're stressed, we know that there are many moments of dysregulation, right? And part of that comes from them not having had that secure attachment experience as an infant. Infants must have it, and because the child, again, for whatever reasons, that's been derailed, that's been disrupted, so they're not able to come back to what typically developing children have developed internally over the first few months of life. As far as language goes, language allows a child, so many children with autism, as you know, have serious language and communication problems. What is the result of that? Well, a language allows a child to stay connected to the love object, in other words, the caregiver, over distance by reaching, in other words, symbolically, by reaching out and by touching the caregiver, right? Symbolically. The child can do that with language. So when the child doesn't have language, this could increase his fears of separation and loss and individuation. So this is all from the mental health world, but I think this is so, again, so apt for our understanding of maybe what has happened and why it is so relevant for us to think about infant mental health when we're working with children with autism. So 3 models that we're going to quickly talk about. These are 3 models of child development that have influenced my own thinking and told the students my long journey from graduate school to first job to doctoral program, and then maybe 25 years ago being introduced to the DIR model, which truly changed my, improved my perspective on, and expanded my perspective on working with children with autism. So very grateful to Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Wieder, should be capital W. And just to remind people who might not know, Dr. Greenspan was a child psychiatrist, and he has passed away, and Dr. Wieder is a child psychologist. So this is a model that they weren't even thinking about language and communication, and yet it was so incredibly helpful to me in working with children with autism. The intentionality model is specific to language, and I'll talk to you about that. And then this, I don't know whether I can call it a model or a configuration of engagement to production, which I have worked on with 2 of my colleagues in the United States. These 2 women, Linda Cervenka and Michelle Ricamato, about 6 years ago opened a school in Chicago for children on the autism spectrum, and they have based the curriculum on DIR, the Developmental Individual Difference Relationship-Based Approach, and also on developmental language models, which would be something like the Bloom and Tinker. Okay? Bottom line, and anybody who's interested, of course, this is just, you have to now go out and really learn about it, right? So if anybody's interested in DIR floor time, what is it that DIR floor time gives us? That certainly as speech-language pathologists, I really don't believe we embrace this as much as we could have, but DIR reminds us about it. So one is that DIR is based on emotional symbolic stages of development. It's a model of typical child development, but it's based on emotional development and symbolic development. And I'll come back to that in a minute. It's got a much broader definition of symbols. In language, we think of language as a symbol. We also, of course, think of play as a symbol. And in DIR, play is really pushed out as an emotional symbol in an expansive kind of way. So whatever our view of play is, it just gives us, again, another perspective on that. A much broader understanding of affective range. As a student of speech-language pathology, I learned very little about affective range. I knew there was affective range. Bloom and Tinker have talked about that. But in DIR, it's much, much more elaborated. A greater understanding of the relationship between emotions and symbols. I think traditionally speech-language pathologists think about the relationship between cognition and symbols. But in DIR, there's much more emphasis on the relationship between emotion and symbol. That's interesting and important. Greater understanding of the body. I had basically none prior to DIR. And it's very interesting because we watched videotapes over these last 10 days with the students, and we saw some children. The question is, what should the goals be? What language goals should we have for these children? And we see the boy is laying down on the floor and spending most of the time laying down. And we stop ourselves and say, whoa, 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 we're not ready for language goals. This boy needs some help with his body. He needs help with regulation. He was hypo, right? So not up, not alert, not available for learning. So this is something I've learned much more from DIR. And coaching, I couldn't agree more. In this case, we're prioritizing parent coaching, but it also could be teacher coaching, whoever is interacting with the child. And in fact, coaching is central to the DIR, parent coaching is central to the DIR model. If you go, I remember when I started in DIR, I showed a video that I thought, wow, I look really good in this video. I'm going to show it to these people. They're going to be really impressed with me, you know. So I was doing therapy with the child, and the parent was sitting in the corner, observing. And, you know, showed the video, expecting to have, you know, lots of positive feedback. And somebody from the DIR community says to me, why is the parent sitting there? And I thought they meant this was great, the parent's in the room. So I said, yes, you know, I do bring the parent in the room, you know. Isn't that terrific? And they said, no, they don't mean that. Why is the parent in the corner rather than working with the child? And that was like, what? You know, I never even thought of that. So that's an example of something where my eyes were really opened, and since then have worked much more on parent coaching. This you can read when you have a moment, but I wanted to put it in to show that in the Greenspan view, it's emotion that is the integrator of learning. So emotion serves as the second sentence, the architect or orchestra leader for the mind's many functions. So here the key point here is at each stage in the pathway to intelligence, emotions orchestrate cognition, language, motor, sensory, and social experience. So perhaps it's an overstatement of the role of emotion, but nonetheless, I have myself come to appreciate this point of view and believe in this point of view. These are the DIR levels. And again, I invite you all to become students of DIR and learn what all these levels mean. But basically, when you see a child, when you assess a child, you determine what level they're in. And although these levels have ages that we would see in typical development, notice that the ages are not here. And one of the reasons for that is that in this model, chronological age is somewhat irrelevant. The question is where, for example, the little boy I was just talking about that we saw in the video, I think maybe he was 4, maybe 3.5, I think. But he was really at level 1, which is very, very early in typical development. So there was a 3.5-year-old boy, his chronological age was 3.5, but he was at level 1. So in this view, you begin at level 1, right? And the fact that he's 3.5, not to say it's not relevant, but it's less relevant for this developmental model. Some of the other children we saw were at a different level, maybe at level 2 or level 3, and they were also 3.5 years old. Doesn't matter, wherever they are in development. This is suggesting, as all developmental models suggest, that there are foundations, steps to be taken, because this is what integrates development by beginning at the beginning. Or what they refer to climbing the developmental ladder or climbing the symbolic ladder. That was it for DIR. Choo-choo! Okay, if you want to study, it takes about a year. And I invite you to look at the, I should put it on here, it's called Profectum, strange name, Profectum is the website for the DIR training. The intentionality model was developed by language people. Lois Bloom was a psycholinguist, and Erin Tinker was also. And what we learn from the intentionality model is that language depends on and comes out of an interaction of cognition, emotion, and social interaction. Okay, so first I started with the first developmental principle about a baby in the context of their caregivers, right? Now we're coming in a little bit and saying language and communication develops in the context of cognitive development, social development, and emotional development. And the point that Bloom made, Lois Bloom, of course, is one of the most famous and important researchers in child language. And many people have used or tried to use her information, her models, and her research to understand children with challenges. Earlier in her career, she did talk about children with challenges. Later in her career, she was more focused on typical development. But so the point is that language is not acquired separate from cognitive, emotional, and social developments. So all of the development is interacting back and forth. That's really important, because then if we have the list of what happens in language at this year, and this year, and this year, and this year, that's not the only list we need to look at. We need to look at the other list on cognition and emotional development and social development and see where they come together. What do you need in order to achieve that language milestone? What do you need cognitively or emotionally or socially? So that was very important. And the model looks like this. Language is in the center. Again, this is about maybe a year's worth of learning. I take a year with my students. And language is in the middle, but there's two other big developments: social emotional development, cognitive development. As you notice, they are, you know, the overarching developments, and then we get into language, form, content, and use. Form refers to the structure of language, content refers to the meanings of language, and use refers to the interpersonal use of language. Okay, so this is also a very big model, a large model. And putting language, in both cases, we're putting language in the broadest, not the narrow, the broadest context. Speech-language pathologists are, and why all of this is so relevant, besides everything I've already said, speech-language pathologists are concerned with what impacts the development of language and what is impacted by the development of language. Both of those things, right? So what contributes to developing language, but then how does language contribute to your further development in those areas? And we're very concerned with both of those, with the arrows going both ways. Lately, that we talk about this is using the term developmental integration. I think people working in their areas are sometimes, you know, a little more tunnel vision about their area. When you're working with children with autism, you could define autism as the DSM-5 does or other frameworks, or you could say that children with autism do not have integrated development. They have strengths in areas, right? They have challenges in areas, but it's not, mainly the development is not integrated. And so that's a helpful construct, because it means that you, as the educator or therapist, you yourself have to be very integrated in your developmental knowledge, right? You have to have not just the information on language, but the information on the other areas, because a child with autism actually doesn't just have a problem in language, right? He has a problem in many areas. That's why he has a problem in language. Excuse me. So the question now is, what's the best way to make a paradigm that reflects developmental integration. And how could we use that paradigm for assessment and intervention? So that's what my friends Michelle, Linda, and I are trying to address. The developmental integration principles are, some of them are that early capacities of human development are critical for success in later developing capacities. And I'll show you how we have represented that. And again, this is regardless of the child's age. Okay? So there's some capacities that come before others. The development in any one domain, I just said this, is affected by development in all other domains. Okay? So this is like when the previous speakers are saying, what are the competencies, right? This could turn into competencies for speech-language pathologists. So it's saying, yes, of course, you have to know everything you can about speech and language, but if you're going to work with children with autism, and of course other children as well, given the nature of the problem, you have to know about the relationship of all these domains because of the nature of that problem, right? We do have children who have really purely language problems. Children with SLI, specific language impairment, or late talkers. Their cognitive development looks good, maybe up to a certain point. Their social emotional development looks good. They have all the precursors. They have all the ingredients for developing language. So something happened in the development of a symbolic system in their case. But that is not true for children with autism. Development in non-language areas like play supports and ignites the development of language and communication. So on the one hand, you could say, if you're going to be a speech-language pathologist, this is absolutely overwhelming. Now I have to know about every single aspect of development. How could I do this? Okay, I'm not sure, but it's a good goal to have out there, right? But the positive thing is, you're going to have goals in a lot of other areas besides language. So you also have flexibility because you're going to have social goals and emotional goals and play goals. You understand? So it's not just language goals, and it's not even language meaning production until a certain point in the child's development. So the tool that we're developing is called the DALI, the Developmental Observation of Language, links to intervention. And we have stages of language development and developmental capacities. These are the stages based on some work we did a while ago. So these are 6 stages of development. So the first thing is, just like DIR, what are going to be our stages that we're going to use to, when we see the child, to decide where he is in language development. Okay? So he's 4 years old, but he's pre-intentional. He's 4 years old, he's pre-linguistic and intentional, right? He's 4 years old and he's at first words. Again, chronological age is irrelevant, and of course we can have the conversation about when does chronological age become relevant. But we'll save that in case anybody has a question. And these are basically stages of language development. There's information in the Gerber and Present of everything you expect to see in these stages. Okay? And then the capacities so we're putting together the stages with the capacities. And the capacities that we have focused on are engagement, intentionality, shared ideas and meanings, comprehension, and production. The motivation for this really came from many years of my own experience, many years of Linda and Michelle's experiences of people meeting children or trying to educate children with autism who were nonverbal, and the goals were always on production. So you have a nonverbal child who's 4 years old, and the goal is to teach him to say, I want a cookie. Okay? So this was typical in what I saw, this was typical in what they saw. And when they were developing their school curriculum, they wanted to really to do something different. They wanted to have a way to assess and treat and also to post-test, so to speak, after they did the intervention. Because I don't really need it. I work in a college clinic. I can pretty much, I recommend it to anybody who wants a lot of freedom, work in a college clinic. But they did not have that freedom because they're in a school. And they needed to have benchmarks and analysis and observational data of what happened in September and where is he in January and where is he in May. But they didn't like the traditional ones, right? The child will do this 80% of the time, for example. They didn't feel that represented development, which it doesn't. So they were interested in developing for their school, and I was interested in developing for clinical practice. The reason regulation is in red here is because as it exists now, regulation is not actually in the protocol that we've developed, but it should be. And so we have to think about that more. This is a same information, but showing, much like DIR does, how development proceeds. Now, this is done like, oh wow, this is very neat, the way children develop, just engagement, then they go to, okay, so that's not true, right? Because typically developing children, it's much more fluid than this. However, when you are working with children with challenges, you need a framework. What could help the therapist and the educator organize information about a child, right? So you don't want to just have these observations, these observations, these observations. It has to be organized in some way. So this is offering an organizational paradigm. Does it mean you have to have 100% engagement before you go on to intentionality? Of course not. You have to use your good judgment. And maybe you're going to have engagement, as we saw over the last 10 days, in one context, and there you can go on to intentionality. But in another context, you don't have any engagement, or let's say any other context. Only in the child's favorite context do you have engagement. So then we need to spread out engagement. But in the favorite context, let's keep going. Let's go to intentionality, or let's go to ideas, etc. But everything has to be broad, across many contexts. We use the same paradigm to understand the typical challenges that children have in autism. But this is going from producing down, right? So if we start with engagement, children with autism often have trouble engaging in playful, affective, interpersonal interactions. If that's the case, start there. Children with autism have trouble understanding and expressing communicative intentions, like, you know, I want you to look over there, but the child doesn't understand that. Or the child himself doesn't indicate, look over there, right? Even though he sees something interesting. Understanding and creating new ideas and meanings, that's knowledge. Schemas, that's very Piagetian. Schemas and knowledge. Understanding language and communication. Does the child understand gestures, words, and sentences? If the answer is not too well, that's where you go. We're not ready for production. And then production, same thing. Gestures, sounds, words, sentences. So let's okay. Let's quickly look at each of the capacities with a little bit of video to support it. So engagement, the interaction, back and forth, reciprocity. See, engagement depends on arousal and responsiveness. The little boy we saw this week who was laying down, he wasn't yet aroused enough and kind of energized enough. That's what engagement is. And the term intersubjectivity is very important. It develops between an infant and the caregiver. It's the foundation for everything in terms of relationships later in life. And children with autism have trouble with intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity is reading somebody else, and then the adult, if it is, reading the child, and some kind of back and forth reading of each other. And I'll show it to you here with Phoebe, who's just a few months old. The sound is not good on this, but it doesn't matter because, as I said the last time I showed it, because the grandmother is just, so you can fill that part in. She's not really talking to her. Okay, so you can explain engagement with words, or you can say, look at Phoebe and her grandmother. That's engagement, right? And what's happening there, even though it has nothing to do with language, it has everything to do with affect and non-linguistic communication, is back and forth and back and forth. Typically, developing children experience this 1,000,000 times before they move into language. And this is not like, oh, that's cute, and then we go to language. This is necessary. This is necessary because this is starting the whole idea of two human beings connected to each other and communicating, which of course later will be filled with language, right? Okay. Intentionality, the next part of the capacities, is when people are sharing psychological states. You can comprehend somebody's intention. You can produce an intention. Intentionality does not equal language. Intentionality is the purpose for which you're communicating. And I can do that non-verbally. You should look over there. Or I could do it verbally with look, right? And similarly in the responsive side. So intentionality, and I have to say when I first joined DIR, I really think they were defining intentionality as language. They didn't really have an understanding of the whole symbolic system that is called language. This is from the work of Tomasello. Intention reading: only if a young child understands other people as intentional agents can she acquire and use linguistic symbols. So if any of you are working with children with autism, if you have that child in mind and you think about how intentional is the child, not how much does he talk. If he is not very interpersonally intentional, that is where you need to be. And that is not by asking him to say things. That's done by interpreting his behaviors as intentional. But Tomasello says that's not the whole story, because we have we intentionality, shared intentionality. Humans are biologically adapted for participating in joint attentions. Like Phoebe is already, I mean, she's not so purposefully intentional, but her grandmother is, you know, giving intention and meaning to what she's doing. So intentionality, a motivation to share psychological states with one another. Okay, and these are these beautiful videos that I know Rachel loves too, that show young children, I always forget how old they are, 18 months, 22, somewhere around there, from the Max Planck Institute. This is also from the work of Michael Tomasello.
Simple. No, this person has serious problems.
That's what he's thinking by the third time.
What's wrong with him?
Okay, so again, we could describe intentionality, or we could look at these children who are like 18 months old and understand completely the intention of the adult. I agree with Sarah, the one who's putting the blue blocks on. I think by the third time he's thinking, something's wrong with this guy. He's saying he has motor planning problems. Yeah. Okay, so here is Emma. A long time ago now, I made a DVD, a training DVD called Visual Reality, and this whole thing is on YouTube, so you can find it there if you're interested. It talks about these models, and it shows the therapy with this child over the course of a year, and how we use the different models to determine our goals and how we were working with her. But the point here is to look for intentionality.
Thursday, the letter that you saw for us.
It's mommy in the background talking, and that's my graduate student.
And so she's doing that for I think people are going to evaluate her and see where she's at, but I think they're going to give this time. They're going to talk about when I'm coming in. And Steve's therapist is still looking for someone. The person that I had is no longer, no, you said, yeah. No. Oh, okay. Yes.
Okay. So I think you probably feel that Emma has, she's playing very nicely with the bus, but she has problems in engagement and intentionality. So we would have goals that were, now she's 2.5, she's talking a little bit, not much. In her preschool setting, they're working on her talking, they're even working on her oral motor abilities, which is crazy. But we said that if we look at development from everything we know, the place to start is on engagement, interpersonal interactions. And so that's what her therapy looks like. In the DVD, you can see how we do it with blocks, how we do it with baby bath time kind of thing, markers, all different contexts that we use. But here, I'll just show you a 3-part sequence about a couple of months between the first and the last of how we start. One of the things that we talked a lot about over the last 2 weeks is what is the therapist's goal? So if you're interacting with the child and you would like her to talk, that puts you in a very different place as the therapist than if you say, I want her to engage with me. I want her to go back and forth, right? Because then you're counting as good something very different than if you're holding out for the word. Do you understand? So in these videos, you may be able to see that. I think, oh, no, I have to. So sometimes when we look at a tape, we should say, what are we not doing? She's looking in a mirror.
Is Emma's? This is a cup.
Being intentional. Just trying to get the pacing of interaction. Counts. A month later, now we have a gesture, we have a look, we have a stop. Go, what happened? No?
Track.
Let's try again. See if we can go a little further. Ah.
If you stop there.
Yeah, it stops there. Yeah.
No, it continues.
It continues.
In real life, it continues.
In real life.
No, I mean at the video, it continues. So I don't know why it's stopping. See, there's more. Ah. Okay, I don't know.
No, you can't continue.
No? Okay, anyhow, it goes from her, just this back and forth, to her gesturing and looking, which you saw the beginnings of in that clip, and then it goes to her gesturing, looking, and saying, put it in. So by the third time, she's got it kind of coordinated. The okay is not quite as frantic as in the first one. It's not the only verbal option. because she has a little more language by the third time. But the main thing is that we feel by doing this back and forth, she goes like this. Oh, okay, I know what you mean. Put the water in. She goes like, ah, blah, blah, blah. Oh, put the water in. She takes my hand. Oh, put the water in. So this is suggesting that all these forms are communicative. We treat them as intentional. We're not stopping the action. Occasionally I say cup, I say water. They do a little bit of modeling. But she doesn't have to say it that's not what I'm after. And you see the progression over time. Okay? Shared ideas and meanings refers to the child learning about the world, the child's knowledge about the world. It's first you have ideas, then you have language. First you have ideas, then you have language. So many of the children with autism have restricted ideas, limited ideas, which is one reason that their language is also limited. The typical things that children talk about in the first, learn about, I should say, the ideas they learn in the first year of life are the Piagetian ideas of means end, causality, objects, space, movement. These are ideas that a child is learning. This is the knowledge that the child has at by the time he starts to use language. This is Wilson, typically developing 22-month-old. And you'll see his father's feet soon. That top. That top. In. Daddy says you have to turn it. You have to line it up. Put it on the right way. Daddy helps with his feet. Okay, but Daddy's doing it. Wilson's saying, yeah, but I didn't do it. Top. So Daddy can have a drink, but he can't put the top on again. I like here Wilson goes, ah, as if he had the drink. See? Okay. So the whole idea really was for Wilson to do it himself, right? But what ideas does he have? Does he have ideas? Yes, of course. He has ideas that the bottle has a top. He has idea that you can drink what's in the bottle. He has the idea that Daddy could help him, but he doesn't want Daddy to help him anymore. So he has a lot of ideas, and he's starting to talk, but it's the ideas we're interested in, right? Now, Wilson also happens to be engaged, intentional, right? He understands, his comprehension is good, everything else is lined up, which is you know, when it's all together, it's sometimes a little harder to see, but he obviously is typically developing. So Emma had some shared ideas about the bus. She had some ideas, shared meaning ideas that the culture has. We have the idea that things go into little spaces, right? She wasn't sharing intentionally her ideas, unlike Wilston, who had ideas and was sharing by being intentional. Okay? Comprehension is another stage, what the child understands in language. And here is a 4-year-old child who has problems in comprehension. And even though she is 4, she's maybe a little more like 18 to 24 months in terms of her developmental level. And you can see her comprehension issues.
Give foods to mommy.
Mommy is in the red shirt.
And she was watching the poems. You see that?
Come on, mommy.
It's okay.
Here, can you ask Ashley to dry boots?
So she gave it to the wrong person.
Dry boots off.
Now
Come over here by mommy. Over here.
to ask the other woman to dry it.
Here, get Ashley to dry boots.
She interprets it as drying it herself. Very thoroughly.
Okay.
And then gives the towel. Michelle's saying, put Elmo under the tent. I don't know why this is good. She puts him in the tent.
Put Big Bird under the chair.
Videos.
Hey, put mommy under the parachute. Mommy wants, mommy wants to go under the parachute.
She's listening, right?
Mommy under.
She puts the doll under. So this is an example of really now the child, she's engaged enough, she's intentional enough, she has some ideas, the ideas are at a bit lower level, and the comprehension of language itself is a problem. So her goals would be specific to comprehension. I'm sure she would have goals on shared ideas also, but the goals for her relates more specifically to comprehension, that the adult should limit their input to her to 2-word phrases. When the child's about to do something, to use gesture, facial expression, body language, etc., visuals to support comprehension and also to support her development of new ideas, right? But all the ideas she had, they made sense. She dried the doll, she gave the towel. She put the doll in the tent. That's what you usually do. You put the big bird on the chair. That's what you usually do. So she's at a particular stage of comprehension. And the last part of my, so it's a time joke. Do I have time for the last part? Yes. The last part is about Matthew, who the students in the class heard more about Matthew than they could even believe. Matthew is a child that I've seen since he's 4. He is actually 17 now, so I've seen him for 13 years for therapy at the Queens College Speech, Language, and Hearing Center 2 times a week, and have worked with his mother extremely closely. The question comes up. Here's a question which I'm sure will come up again. What about older kids? This is all very nice when the kid is 2 or 3 or 4, but now this kid is 16, actually 17. Or what about him? Is it still appropriate to use developmental thinking for an older child? Now, Matthew Snapshot has done extremely well in over the course of time because of his mother, in my opinion, but has significant challenges, very significant challenges. He's a verbal kid, he's a social kid, but he's a kid with serious comprehension problems and serious theory of mind problems. Okay, so his strengths, this is according to his mother. She and I gave a talk recently, and these were the strengths that she listed. He has a strong interest in social interaction. He has an interest in peers. He has a desire to be part of the cool kid clique. He has faster processing of language and interactions than he had. He's verbal and conversational. He's a great athlete, particularly skateboarder. He's talented with music. He plays the drums, and he has a sense of humor. His challenges, according to his mother: theory of mind, understanding friendship, what it really is, ability to, this is a challenge, pull off the sassy attitude. Oh yeah, we didn't know what sassy was. Cheeky. So he has a challenge because he uses this little fresh, you know, not the way you talk to people, the way you talk to your brother, but not the way you talk to other people. He tries to pull that off with his teachers, me, and other people. So she doesn't think that's such a great idea. He has now started to understand that he has challenges, which is difficult for him. He has serious problems with conversation. School has become a disaster. He hates school. He's very unsuccessful in school. His mother also feels there are expectations of him people don't realize until he starts talking that he has a problem, because he's a very nice-looking boy and you know, has good motor skills. He doesn't look different, you know, and which she thinks is a good thing, but also is a problem for him. And he has, hello, who doesn't? Sibling issues. Actually has a little more sibling issues with the younger brother who has problems, and they really don't get along well at all. So his challenges in theory of mind have, this is what I'm talking about specifically, have impacted everything, basically. He doesn't understand he has reading comprehension problems because he doesn't understand human motivation. So with Romeo and Juliet and what happened, you know, as I said in class, he understood Romeo like Juliet, Juliet like Romeo. The end. He has social challenges. He thinks you can just be a friend with anybody. He thinks he could see a skateboarder kid that he likes, and he's his friend, you know, and he's going to call him up. And his father has to put the brakes on that a lot. He has emotional challenges. I mentioned in the class that about a year ago, it was Autism Day, and he wore a blue t-shirt to school. And I can't give the whole context, but for some reason, his mother decided that that was the day to tell him that he was autistic. So doesn't quite know what that means. He thinks it's something about his talking. And I realized recently he associates me with his autism because he thinks he came to Queens College because he couldn't talk and because he was autistic. So somehow I'm this become a symbol of his autism. He does know that he doesn't want it. He doesn't want autism. So he has talked to me about wants to have an operation and take it out of his brain. I believe his parents told him it's in his brain. And he has problems with the rules of society. He put nails in the tires of the next door neighbor's car, and really, he did it really. He had no particular problem with the next door neighbor, and eventually we found out he saw a video on YouTube where a kid did that. So he did. So, you know, lots of issues around theory of mind. These are his goals, which you can kind of peruse when you have a moment, but I wanted to show that he has goals in a number of areas. Language formulation is a goal, but we do it in natural conversation for the most part. I'll show you a little video. Of course, we're trying to support his struggles now. I mentioned in the class, I think he's somewhat depressed. because he realizes he has problems, and he very much wants to be independent in a way that he cannot. So this is really bothering him a lot. Theory of mind, using conversation, etc. And we're also trying to help him develop his self-identity. His sense of self is rather weak, rather limited. So, what do I think? I think his original problems in intentionality continue. I think it's because of his problems in intentionality that he has problems in language, that he has problems in theory of mind, and that he has problems in knowing the rules of the culture. Okay, let's hope this video works. But I want to go ahead.
Could you kind of
yes.
see what's going on so that
yes. Thank you. Okay, so what happened is there was, this is more information than you want, but on Long Island in New York, there was an indoor skate park, and it closed. And this is on his mind all the time. Every session he's talking about Oil City, and Oil City closed, okay? And we are joining him. But today in this day, we get a really nice, elaborated conversation. Notice what we are doing. So he comes into therapy, and if he brings something up, we look at those 4 goals: formulation, sense of self, theory of mind, and we're trying to bring it into that situation. Granted, it's much harder than if you say, okay, here's our theory of mind activity, and here's our formulation activity, but we're trying to do this in a naturalistic way, high affect. So I have 2 students, this one with the head that you see, the other one also has a head, and a man, and you can't see him, Brad, and then I'm basically where Matt is looking most of the time, is towards me. Good. It's driving me a little crazy.
I thought you were going to ask me first.
Okay, it's not quite started yet, but I'm not fooling around with it.
Perhaps if I just go to Far Rockaway.
Yeah.
Skates.
Oh, that's where he skates?
Yeah.
Memorial City.
Yeah. I think I should say, my friends, we should reopen Oil City.
We should reopen Oil City.
That's what I think.
The kids from the page don't chant. Reopen Oil City.
Reopen Oil City. Reopen Oil City.
I did it all along. Each kid say, reopen Oil City.
Reopen Oil City. We need to have different voices.
Reopen Oil City. Everyone will say, and then the government person will say, guys, listen to me, read my lips.
The government person.
Read my lips. We're not opening an indoor skate park. And I'll say, we're not? And they'll say, yes. And I don't want to hear another word about it.
That's the government person. Is mean, obviously.
Look, you guys will stop right now. There will be consequences.
There will be consequences.
But wait.
And I'll stand up for myself.
Yeah, they're right behind you. We could have big like.
And then it'll say placards. It'll say follow Matt.
Yeah, follow Matt.
What Matt said.
We want Matt. Give us the part. We want Matt.
And then the government will say, hey, the governmented person says.
The governmented person.
We're going to regret. So don't say anything.
Wait.
Don't you say anything you're going to regret.
Free speech, and we have the right to demonstrate.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, now what do you say, Mr. Government Politician?
Don't you say anything you're going to regret.
Yeah.
That in your state.
So we're role playing.
Yeah, but we have the right. We have the right to assemble and protest.
The way that don't get on with me. We must obey the politics. We gotta fight for the right.
Party!
Did you make that up?
No, it's a song.
It's a real song.
Yeah, and then everyone will say,
Hey, guys. Oh, I get that. If I'm not mistaken, I saw in your homework the Bill of Rights.
yeah.
Yeah, what's in there, the Bill of
You
Rights?
have to pay millions of dollars.
For what?
You have to pay $1,000 in order to let in your skate park again.
Oh, that's why we don't have it.
Yeah.
Fund drive. You know what that is?
What's that?
Collect.
We have a fundraiser. How do we collect?
We can sell candy bars.
We can do tricks
What
and
if I made a contest in my backyard, on my driveway,
put like
to
$5
donate for Oil City?
Oh, okay.
Okay, now we're moving along with the ideas.
You come to your sidewalk,
My driveway.
Your driveway.
For the contest.
and there's a contest there.
Yes, and I'll say, time search. What to do?
Okay, and we have to contribute money to what?
Yes. Yeah, no.
How much do you want it to cost?
The key rounds.
How much?
Only $15.
$15 a head.
1.5 or 5.0?
1.5. My dad said, what's all the racket outside?
I'm sure you will.
So it's going to be like a skating event in your driveway.
Yes.
And we charge money for it.
Yeah, but if I put that poster all around the skate park.
Okay, another idea. It's going to put posters up indicating that there's a fund drive.
My house for my donation, for our donation.
For the great fundraiser.
Come to Nat, I bet you, I think you better put your name in it. Come to Nat Whiteman's house. Address,
65 Golden Road.
65 Blooming Hill Road,
It
Manhasset.
says, Mom and Dad, please move the cars.
I was going to say that on the poster?
And I'm going to tell Mom and Dad
Oh.
because
Wait, what about the
people
poster?
are coming.
I think we should start this poster.
I
What
was
does it
thinking
look like?
that. You want to make it?
What if I put it on the, yeah.
Okay, you're making it otherwise before you become.
Okay, so then we go on to make the poster, what should be on the poster, his name, his address, when to come, whatever. And the point of this is to show that from his idea, and by joining his idea about Oil City, and affectively he said, you know, he was mad, right? He's mad that Oil City is closed, so he has this idea that he's going to talk to the governmented person. And we joined that, right? Yeah, that's a great idea. We're going to protest. We're going to put up signs, right? And then from that come a lot of ideas. Now he works on who will come and when will they come and where exactly are they coming and what will be the food and who will collect the money. So from this comes wonderful shared ideas and meanings that are relevant, right? Following the child's lead, that are relevant to what's in his mind. Not only are they relevant, he has ideas about these things. So you are already on safe ground with the language because he has ideas. Some of them are, you know, emerging, but he has ideas. And the one interesting comprehension issue is his homework had the Bill of Rights, you know, United States Bill of Rights. So I thought, wow, this is perfect. We can mention the Bill of Rights. But he misunderstood, right? He thought bill meant how much money. So I said, what about the Bill of Rights? And he said it cost $2,000 to open up the skate park. So there you see the idea, the problem with the idea is he didn't really make the connection between the Bill of Rights. But you can see he's very verbal, he's very social, he is participating in the communication, he has some nice affect, and the work is being done in a naturalistic way. Finally, it's, as I said in the beginning, we were talking about the parent-child interaction as so key to development, the caregiver-child, and how do we as therapists assume a little bit of that role in our interaction as being, in loving relationships, in supportive relationships. So there's a whole part of the work that's about you're developing your own ability. The self-reflection piece that the former speakers were talking about. How do you develop your way of being with a child? How do you learn about what you are bringing to this therapeutic interaction, which is sometimes something you need to address, right? Sometimes it's something you're feeling frustrated. Sometimes you're feeling angry at the parent. Sometimes you're feeling angry at the kid. Sometimes you're feeling a little hopeless. Whatever it is, it's that part of the work is you figuring out by reflecting, thinking, and as those folks were saying, talking to a supervisor or a mentor, what is happening with me? Not just what's happening with the kid. What's happening with me in this interaction? What am I bringing to it? And how is that impacting? I told the students a story of where I went with Matt for an evaluation with Serena Weider, and something during that evaluation, this is several years ago, made me feel that my expectations for him were unrealistic. The idea that he was going to be independent and be able to, live on his own, I don't know, was wishful thinking, hopeful, but I clearly saw in this evaluation that that wasn't going to be the case. And I told the students that when he left, I started to cry. And that, I think there's no problem with that I started to cry because it was sad. It was my own journey of hopes for him that weren't realistic, that I had to readjust and deal with the fact that I was sad about that so that I could go back into the work with him with a cleaner, better frame of mind. Do you understand? But that I discussed with my supervisor so that I could adjust. I don't think it's, as I was saying all the past week or two, you should have feelings. If you didn't have feelings, that would be really weird. So you should have feelings that run the gamut when you're doing such hard work, when you're seeing things that are sad. Right now, I feel very sad about Matt again because he wants to be independent and it's not going to happen. And I just feel so badly he's going to have that struggle in his life. But that's my part. I have to go deal with it, and some of it I might share with him to say, I'm sorry it can't happen. I wish it could, right? That's real. So anyhow, and to bring it back to integration, Dan Siegel, within a relationship, integration, that's what we're going for, integration, refers to respect for each person's autonomy and differentiated self, and at the same time, the dyad is connected in empathic communication. So we always want to be respectful of the child, where he is, the family for sure, where they are. They're not in a bad place, they're just in the place they're in. Same as with the child. Everybody's where they are, and we're going to try to help them get a little further. But it's our own self-reflective abilities that will allow us to do that in the healthiest way. Oh, the end.
ძალიან დიდი პატივია ჩემთვის რომ წარვადგინო ჩვენი კიდევ ორი ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანი სტუმარი, რახელი იფარტი და სარა ზადუნაისკა-ერლიხი, რომლებიც წარმოადგენენ ჰაიფას უნივერსიტეტს, რომლებიც არიან ჰაიფას უნივერსიტეტის ენისა და მეტყველების და კომუნიკაციური დარღვევების დეპარტამენტის რეიჩელი არის ასოცირებული პროფესორი, სარა წარმოადგენს არის ლექტორი ამ უნივერსიტეტის და ისინი აქტიურ მონაწილეობას მიიღებენ ახლა დისკუსიაში და მეორე სესიის მანძილზე Rachel? Yeah, yes. I changed. და მეორე სესიის მანძილზე ისინი უკვე წარმოგვიდგენენ კიდევ ერთ ძალიან მნიშვნელოვან მიდგომას პროექტს ენის განვითარების ხელშეწყობის თვალსაზრისით. და კითხვები.
პირამიდასთან დაკავშირებით. ეს ზოგადი თეორია მეტყველების განვითარების არის. თუ ეს ასეა და პროცესს განსაკუთრებული პროდუქცია ძალიან გრიან არ არის დანილი. იმიტომ სადაც არის share of ideas, პროდუქციები და ჩდება გაცილებით უფრო გრიან თითქოს. ეს იქნება საფეხურების დაზუსტებისათვის მინდა. მესამე საფეხური და ბოლო საფეხური. ისინი ერთმანეთთან როგორ არიან. ისინი პროდუქცია ჩდება ძალიან გრიან, თუმცა მანამდე გაზიარება არსებობს იდეების და მნიშვნელობების.
Yeah. So the pyramid is okay. The pyramid is an artificial way to understand development in the sense of assessing where a child is. The motivation to divide it the way, that's not working. Okay. The motivation to divide it the way that we did was because in autism, we see that the children often don't have enough ideas to start pushing the therapist their production. So we want people to take a step back and say, does the child have a lot of ideas? If he does, you can go ahead to comprehension and production. If he only does this, you probably should work on new ideas with him, helping him develop new knowledge and new concepts. So it's a schematic. It's a way to organize your thinking. It is true in typical development that ideas precede production. It's just it's happening all at once, so it's not sequential like that. And we're making it sound sequential.
ექვსი განმავლობაში მიცოცხლ ბავშვი, იმიტომ რომ ბავშვი არ ერთვებოდა, არ შედიოდა კონტაქტში ბავშვებთან, მასწავლებელთან. ორი წელია, რაც დადიოდა ბავშვი, უკვე თავისი დადის, მეტყველებს, 4 წლისაა ერთმა ბავშვი, მეტყველებს 2 სიტყვიანი წინადადებები, ეს მის ინსტრუქციები, ყავს ფსიქოლოგი, რომელიც გვეხმარება, რა თქმა უნდა, მაგრამ მინდა ბავშვის შეცვლა. რამდენად სტრესული იქნება ეს მისთვის, იმიტომ რომ ამ ბავშვი ისილებს მაგალითად სხვა ბავშვებიდან ბაძავს მას, მაგრამ როგორც ესეთი მისი განვითარება არ ხდება პედაგოგების საბოლოო კვალიფიცირების გამო. ამიტომ გადავწყვეტეთ შევცვალოთ ბაღი, მაგრამ რამდენად სტრესული იქნება ეს მისთვის, ახალი გარემო, ახალი
Well, I could understand why you'd be thinking about that, because change is probably a little difficult for your child, right? So I can understand, imagine that that's a big question in your mind now. But I think that if your gut tells you there might be some better program for your child, that it's worth the risk, but that you should put certain things in place for the child before you actually change, in terms of explaining as much as you can with pictures, and in terms of you being in the new place as much as they will let you stay there for a while, so that you bring the child is changing, but you're also bringing yourself with the child, if you know what I mean, right? Or the child is bringing you. by you being there, or the child having favorite objects from home, something that very speaks to her security, that whatever makes her most secure. Build that in to the transition period. But if she's in the kindergarten and you want her to have a different kind of service, you should do that. Stick to your gut.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question about the kid, Matthew.
Oh.
We don't know. About the kid, Matthew.
Yes.
You told us that he could be independent, and I'm just interested. The idea of independence. What's the idea of independence for him? What he thinks he could be?
He thinks, yeah. Sorry.
Are there any services? He's obviously not well functioning. He's maybe we would say that. So I think that you could manage for his family for him to have assistant or something. Are there some services?
Yeah.
Kind of like this?
When I say independent, his picture is he lives in an apartment by himself. Yeah. So I don't think.
All?
What?
That's the whole independence idea?
Well, so far. No. He drives, he, goes to the bars, he has a girlfriend. Yeah, he doesn't talk too much about the job. That's interesting. In fact, if you say, who's going to pay the rent? He said, I'm going to the bank. You get the money from the bank.
Maybe he will grow up with this.
Maybe he will.
Like the developmental issue.
Okay.
Maybe he will learn that for social things.
I like your attitude.
It's like I have a kid, 17 years old, and I started thinking about him, and it's like just worried about him also, like you are.
Yes. Now he's not going to have to stay at home. No, definitely not. He'll be in some protected, apartments where they have
community.
No, but the people, like counselors. They have counselors or aides or whatever that are living there also, right? You're definitely going to have that.
So there's a facility?
Yes, there are facilities in New York.
Over 18 years?
Yes.
So they must go there, or there's a choice?
It's an option. It's an option. That would be a good option for him, to be with other kids, his age, and to have some freedom, but it's still protected environment.
I wanted to comment on your question, because I think that the way speech-language pathologies or any person who is working on intervention, what you think before about this particular patient will certainly influences the way you work with him. What you imagine yourself, to which point this guy will reach in life, even if you don't think about it in a very conscious way, will for sure affect the way you work with him. I'm not talking about Matthew because, first of all, I think he's a cute guy, but I don't know him. It's the first time I've seen this film, but just in my imagination, my way of thinking, I thought, wow, this guy is, during 1 year, talking about, opening and closing the, what was that? The skateboard. So, and he was really involved and engaged, as Sima talked before. He wanted to talk about it. So maybe if we are thinking about him as a growing adult, maybe we have to propose him at some point to consider pros and cons, advantages of this and disadvantages of complaining about closing this, or writing a letter to the municipality. So proposing him additional ways. I'm talking about him without knowing him. I'm talking about an ideal Matthew. But the way you think about your patient will certainly direct you how to work with him. So I completely agree with Sima that you have to be very connected to the way you think about it, because that's the way you're going to work with him. And that's a very important point.
I also want to...
Yes?
Could you switch off your mic?
Okay. I want to raise in that connection 2 points. One is that being independent is not a dichotomic issue. It's not yes or no. It is graded. You can be independent in some aspects of life and in others less. So many facets to being independent. That's the one thing which is very interesting to look at. The other thing is that it is very connected to what the lecture that was given by the people from Belgium. The environment has to be very involved in handling the procedure of leaving the house and making sure that these children are protected but still independent, and building special places or renting. For example, he will not be in a house by himself. He has to have peers. So some parents connect together and then they rent an apartment, and it develops from individual families that decide to take care of that into a more municipal and national issue, which takes care of the people with disabilities not only when they are young, which is, it should be given a lot of thought how to support these people. And employment is another issue that has to be must be taken care of, because some places are willing to employ people with disabilities with difficulties, but they don't know how, and they don't know who to approach, and they also need support. So basically it's on a national and individual track.
This is, I just want to say one last thing to you. I think maybe you were responding to my saying that I felt sad that Matthew maybe can't realize his dream. But I want to make it clear that he has gone in some ways so much further than I ever would have expected. So I'm not done hoping. I don't want you to get that idea. Yeah, I think that's what you were responding to. Now I realize. And but in other ways, he has not gone far, and surprisingly, you know. That's why we always say we can't predict, because he's further in some things and further back in others than I would have expected. But no, he, as the class knows, he is now independently at camp, at skateboarding camp, for the first time, away from home, for 2 weeks at skateboarding camp. And every minute I'm checking my email to see if his mother has emailed me about how's it going. And now my whole class wants to know too.
Now we do also.
Okay, I'm gonna let you know.
Could you please help me to better understand how to differentiate engagement and initiative? Like, where the theory of mind, so engagement is back and forth. So I read your gestures and I respond to you, no? And then initiative is like also reading, like it was shared reading, intentionality, I'm sorry. Intentionality. So it's like shared, you make two components there too, so shared reading too? So
yes, yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. We spent a lot of time on that in the class. So if you look in typical development, once you're engaged, you're intentional, right? You are probably intentional, reading somebody's cues and sending cues. But again, children with autism have particular difficulty in reading somebody's cues, for example. So that part of the intentionality is not solid, but they could be engaged. They could be having a good time going back and forth, playing, but they maybe for example, okay, I'll use an example from the class, but distort it a little bit. So there's a boy who wasn't engaged, and then the therapist changed what she was doing, and she was pulling him around, and he was smiling, and he really enjoyed it. But he did not intentionally, too much, right? He did not communicate to her that he wanted it to happen again, even though he really liked it. You know, so when she did it again, right? And he was smiling, laughing, enjoying it. Yeah.
It also has to do with the variability. So engagement is something which you can see that somebody is involved. Intentionality has a wide variety of options. Intentionality can be reflected by the means you use to communicate, by your will. What do you want? You can ask a question, you can ask somebody to do something, you can comment, so intentionality is reflected by the communication itself, basically. Engagement is what the involvement in this setting.
Maybe I would like to give another example that will connect us with the next, our presentation about reading, for instance. When you think about typical development and you bring a book to a 9-month-old child, you know, sometimes a natural baby can do, or to put the book in his mouth, but at the same time the mother is trying to point to the book or to say, wait a minute, and take the book out and show the child something. So these are two ways of reading the same situation. Yeah? For one of the partners, you have to put this object in the mouth. For the other one, you want to read, to do something else with the book. So you have to think how to create a shared intention while you are both engaged in the same activity. But the way you interpret that situation is very different. So you have to be in a sort of negotiation, is what Sima says, about where the child is, what you want to bring to this child, and how, without losing him, you try to create a sort of shared intention and engagement in the same activity.
And sometimes people refer to as intention as there's a goal. Yeah, there's a goal. So maybe that also is helpful because it's more discrete.
And engagement is also kind of shared attention, joint attention?
Definitely. Shared attention, yeah.
Thank you.
ამგვარი განწყობებისთვის ძალიან უშუალო და ფერადები ხარ თვითონვე თქვენგანი. მე გახლავართ ქიმიის მასწავლებელი და მე მინდა ასეთი რამე გითხრათ, რას უძღვებთ და რას ვერ უძღვებთ ქართული სკოლა. რა შეეხება ჩართულობას, არაჩვეულებრივი აქცენტი არის, გამიზნულობა და მიზანი, სრულად განსხვავებული მიმართულებებია სასკოლო სივრცეში. ჩართულობა ეს არის мотивация, ეს არის ქცევა, ეს არის განწყობა და კომუნიკაცია. ჩემთვის როგორც მასწავლებლისთვის და მიზანი ეს არის ჩვენი საგნობრივი სტანდარტი. გამიზნულობაში არის აქ მინდა კითხვა დაგისვათ. გამიზნულობაში მე მოვიაზრებ, რომ ანუ როგორ უნდა ვასწავლოთ, იცით რა არის, არაჩვეულებრივია. ჩვენ საუბრობთ იმაზე, რომ თანადგომა გამოვიწყოთ, უნდათ ემპათიის განცდა, მაგრამ იცით სად ვერ უწევს გამოწვევას ქართული სკოლა. ჩვენ რომ მათი ჩართულობა გავზარდოთ დასაქმების თვალსაზრისით, ჩვენ არ ვიცით მათ როგორ ვასწავლოთ. ქართველი შინაარსით დაბრუნებით ძალიან მოყვარულია და მას არასოდეს არ ეშლება როგორ გაუწიოს ვიღაცას თანადგომა. მაგრამ აი ვერ ვუწევთ გამოწვევას სწავლების მეთოდიკაში. ალბათ საინტერესოა მათი რესურსები როგორ ჯერ დავადუსტოთ და როგორ წავიყვანოთ განვითარებისკენ. ეს როგორ გითხრათ, უამრავ შეხვედრაში მაქვს მონაწილეობა მიღებული, მაგრამ ეს არ ისწავლება. ანუ თქვენთან მაქვს ასეთი კითხვა, თუ არსებობს ისეთი პლატფორმები საგანმანათლებლო, რასაც ჩვენ ვიყენებთ თუ group education-ის ან თამაშზე დაფუძნებული სწავლება, ან შემეცნებით მათზე ორიენტირებული. ანუ თუ არის ისეთი პოპულარული თქვენთვის მისაღები, უკვე გამოცდილი და ამუშავებული სასწავლო რესურსები, რომლებიც მოგვცემენ საშუალებას ჩვენ თვითონვე პრაქტიკაში მოვარგოთ ინდივიდუალიზმს და მივიღოთ შედეგი. ანუ ჩემი წუხელი არის სასწავლო მეთოდიკა, რასაც ვერ უძღებს ქართული სკოლა, როგორ ვასწავლოთ მათ და ეს არის გამიზნულობის ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანი აქცენტი.
Could you just say who them is? How should we teach them?
Could you just clarify, you said your last set, this is way too much for your last sentence was, how can we educate them? Who's them? Okay, so I hope you won't be surprised that I don't have an easy answer for you. But I would say that the best program that I have seen is the program my friends have started in Chicago, Soaring Eagle Academy. And I would suggest that you look at that website, Soaring Eagle Academy, and you see how three speech language pathologists put together a curriculum for children with autism, many of whom are much more severely challenged than Matthew, way more severely challenged, children whose school systems could not educate them properly are sent to this school. And I think it would be a wonderful place to start to look at how they are organizing curriculum. One thing I would say that is not a reality in New York, maybe not in Georgia, at that school, every child has an aide. Every child has an aide. And this all relates back to what I was talking about today. The one-on-one, the person who the child develops the relationship with, and this promotes learning.
Okay? I just would like to make a small comment. Sima is coming from the States, we are coming from Israel, who have different budgets also, you know, in the Ministry of Education. So sometimes, you know, you have to think about the approach you want to adopt. You're asking a more central question about a child-centered approach or maybe a skill-centered approach. In Israel, we have been struggling during decades against or trying to balance a skill-centered approach, which is not so easy to formulate it in a balanced way with a child-centered approach. And it's a challenge, you know, and sometimes you can make huge steps, you know, thinking differently, learning, you know, having a good theoretical base that you can make changes and convince other people to make the same change, even if you have budget problems or if you have problems of, you know, qualified people. You've heard in the first lecture that in Denmark, which they have a very nice educational system, 40% of the person, they are not doing, you know, they are not having great diplomas, but they have a very good education system. So sometimes it's a question of learning and making a change in the approach, and that can make a lot of shifts and qualitative shifts.
თქვენ იცით რა, ძალიან დიდი მადლობა ამგვარი პასუხისთვის, თუმცა მე მაინც ვფიქრობ, რომ ეს არ არის მასასთან მიდგომის თვის დასაგეგმი მიზნები. ეს არის მაინც ძალიან ინდივიდუალური, სადაც კლასში 10 მოზარდში კერძო სივრცეზე ვსაუბრობ, კერძო სკოლაზე ერთი ან ორი, ან შესაძლებელია სკოლაში სულ 5 ადამიანი იყოს. ამიტომ ჩვენი მიდგომებით მე მაინც ვფიქრობ, რომ ვერ ვისაკეთებ, რასაც ქვია საერთო ხედვა, საერთო სტანდარტი. ეს მე მაინც მგონია, რომ ძალიან ინდივიდუალურია. და ამიტომ ვინც არის წარმატებული ამ საქმეში, მაინც უნდა გაგვიზიარონ. თუმცა ვერ ვიტყვი, რომ სხვა საქმეში არ ვარ წარმატებული, მაგრამ ამ კონკრეტულში სწავლებაში ამათთვის რაღაცა მაინც გადასახადი გვაქვს. მადლობა.
მეთიუსთან მიმართებაში თქვენ თვითონ ის 17 წლის არის. მე მეტყველების თერაპევტად გამახსენდა მეთიუსთან ახლაზე ჩემი რამდენიმე პაციენტი. ხომ მაგრამ გეჩვენებათ, მე მომეჩვენა ყოველ შემთხვევაში, რომ 17 წლის ასაკში იმ რესურსის მქონე ბავშვთან შეიძლებოდა მეტის გაკეთება და მაინტერესებს რა, ანუ ვინ მუშაობდა კიდევ მეთიუსთან ამ წლების განმავლობაში. მადლობა.
Okay. First of all, could you clarify?
Sorry. Yeah. Could you clarify what you mean by you could do more? Could you, I mean, you're probably right, but what do you mean? Let's make sure we're talking the same language. Ha ha ha. Yeah.
მე მყავს პაციენტები, რომლებსაც მივამსგავს მეთიუ და ეს პაციენტები არიან 7 წლის, 9 წლის, 11 წლის, მაგრამ ზუსტად იციან მაგალითად, რომ ბანკში მისულს ფულს არავინ არ მისცემთ. და უამრავი აი ესეთი დეტალი პოტენციალობის კაცთან მიმართებაში, ანუ ცოტა უფრო რეალისტურები არიან, მე ვიტყოდი.
Okay, this is an issue of Matthew's cognitive abilities. So it's not that nobody tried to teach him some things about money or the bank or anything else. He couldn't learn it. He didn't understand it. So I think you're taking a slightly different perspective. Matthew is in school, of course, a special school where they teach them about money, and they teach them, or try, and teach them about everything, practical. He goes to psychotherapy. His mother works with him. So it's not a matter that he wasn't taught that. It's a matter of what he understands or doesn't understand. So you're looking at it a little differently. And even as far as we're concerned, we role-play the bank, we role-play the mother putting the money in the bank and then coming to take the money out of the bank. But if you ask him today, how will you get money, he say, I'll go to the bank. So I just don't think, probably because you don't know Matthew, that you're catching what his own challenges are in learning certain things.
Thank you very much, Nino, and thank you all for staying at this time of the day. We are going to have one presentation with 2 presenters. So it's one ticket with 2 shows. But we are used to work like that. My name is Rachel, and I'm a speech and language clinician. I work at the University of Haifa, in the Department of Speech and Language Communication Disorders. And Sarah comes from education. Do you want to say something?
My name is Sarah, and I work in particular in shared projects between speech-language pathologists and teachers. I work in the field of special education, and I teach also in Haifa, the Department of Developmental Disorders, to see how teachers, educators, and speech-language pathologists can work together.
So our lecture is based a lot on what has been said by Sima. We feel like it's continuing the conception, the way of thinking about early education and the way we think about early development and intervention in early development. Children that are young, and what do they need, and how do we approach therapy. And the title today is Emergent Literacy. It's a different area, it's a very interesting area. We will do it in various ways, including activity that you will be involved in. Emergent literacy in young children. This is an issue which raises a lot of questions. Shared reading as a space for the development of dialogue, both dialogue and literacy skills. So it is clear now that we have to talk about the definition, the general definition of what is literacy. So let's see now. Literacy is the ability to make proper use of oral and written texts that a society possesses and esteems in order to achieve personal goals, develop individual potential, enhance one's knowledge, and participate actively in society. But this is a general definition.
Yes, I would like to add that in the past there were very more restrictive definitions of emergent literacy, what literacy means. Literacy in the past means to be a literate person, means to know reading and writing. Now you have, in the last decades, more wider definitions that included all aspects of oral and written language and the use of oral language in a written modality. For instance, we are here, I'm using the oral modality, but the discourse styles is a written discourse styles because it's a style which is inspired from the written language. So we know that when we're talking about literacy in young children, we are not talking only about acquiring written language and knowing how to write the letters or how to decode, but also how to use language in a variety of discourse styles, which are most of them inspired and rooted in the written language. The more you can play with language and have different discourse styles, the more literate person you are.
And we will go into details later, especially now focusing on early literacy development. So literacy, when we talk about a literate person, is a literate person who has acquired education, they know how to read and write, they know how to use cultural resources. But when does it happen and how does it look like with young children? So for young children, we refer to literacy as emerging. It is emergent literacy. It is when things are starting to evolve, because literacy is not yes or no, it is developmental. So emergent literacy is the children's knowledge and familiarity with the written language as a discourse style and as a notational system, which we will talk just now about them, both discourse style and notation system. But pay attention to the following statement. Before they are formally taught to read and write, we talk about emergent literacy not with children who attend school, but children who are at preschool. And this is the novelty. This is the point that we would like to emphasize today and demonstrate today how important it is to pay attention to the literacy development of children who are not yet going to school?
You know, our starting assumption is that children are curious. You know, they're asking questions about the world. When you see a 9-month-old child sitting a baby and dropping things, and you know that they are thinking about what happened when objects are falling, you know, and they're asking themselves questions about features of objects, the same way children are asking themselves questions about written language. They are born in a written environmental printed world. They go to the supermarket, they go to the cinema with your mom, you got tickets, you got advertisements, you have a lot of environmental printing, and there is nothing for us to think that children are not trying to investigate what's going on with the written language. I'm not talking even about reading books that we will talk about more in depth today, but in general about the curiosity of children or of asking themselves questions about the written language. Once we thought that, you know, children start to approach language as soon as they are formally taught, you know, in first grade. Now, 3 decades or even more, 4 decades ago, we know that children write the way they think the written language is characterized. They read as they think people should read. So they treated language as an object to be studied. Not only the oral language, but also the written one.
Now, in terms of the awareness, it's very interesting that we often see that when we talk about these issues of emergent literacy at early childhood, we see that there is a tendency to accept it for children, your own child or your own grandchild, because it looks so interesting and you accept it. But somehow, when we talk to people who come from education, they have difficulties agreeing that there is something to do with the written language before children attend school. So that this issue, pay attention to that. Something happens before the age of 6 years. I don't know what age do they attend school here? At 6, yes. Children are not tabula rasa. As Sarah says, there is so much stimulation around. What is happening there? And they try, they experience. And we want to look at the experience they have, and we want to look at the ways we can encourage this experience, because this will help further for further development. Okay, so now let's talk about the 2 concepts. The one, notational system. Notational system treats the language as a representational system. It has rules, it symbolizes something, it represents, and the child in language development, as you know, has to discover this notational system. Notational system in written language has more complicated issues, because speaking is one thing and discovering the representative figures is another issue. You want to add to that?
And we're not talking only about, you know, phoneme-grapheme correspondence, which means that for each sound you have a letter, or for 2 sounds you have 2 letters, or for 3 sounds you have 2 letters instead of 3. We're talking also about conventions of how the written language looks like. For instance, the segmentation between words. You know, I don't know, I really apologize that we don't know enough about your language, your written language. But for instance, in Hebrew, you have some letters which are final. You know, you have a final M and a final N. And sometimes when I used to work with children, you know, preschool children, they ask, but I want my letter also to have a final one. You know, why do you have final with letters for some letters and for other letters you don't? So that simple thing, children are asking themselves question. In Hebrew you also have a letter, hey, which has 2 parts. and some children count them as 2 letters because they, okay, there is one sign and here's another sign. So when we are talking about emergent literacy, we're talking one aspect is the written language as a notational system. So how children discover the way we write, the conventions of the written language. We would like to share with you some examples. Okay.
The other is the discourse style, which we have mentioned just a few minutes ago. Language used for writing is different from language used for speech. In most cases, because at times, for example, now that we are lecturing, it is closer to written language. We are not talking about the way we cook a cheesecake. That would look different. That looks different. So talking has different aspects than writing. When you write, the one thing you know is that once you wrote it, you cannot change it. When you see people talk, you can see how many times they correct themselves, they change. They look at the person and they say, you didn't understand. And that the other person is not really, you don't have to say, I don't understand. I can see it in your eyes. And there are things in the conversation which is online by speaking that do not exist when you write. And you have to take into consideration many issues. The other thing is that you have a turn. When you talk to somebody, you have a turn. And the turn is limited. You can't take a whole hour in your turn because they will tell you, well, okay, enough, you made yourself clear, it's my turn to talk. This is often happening to children when they don't know how to take the turn because the adults speak and speak and speak and they want to say something and they shout, I want to talk, I want to say something. So talking is limited in terms of the time you are allocated. But writing, you can write a whole explanation, you can write a whole narrative, a whole story, and you obey 2 rules. See to what type of constraints you obey while you write.
On the other hand, when you speak, you have a lot of opportunities to correct yourself, to correct, to add, to change, to edit yourself online. When you write, the text becomes, it has its own presence. It should be decontextualized. So what you write is what remains. What? Okay. And before, seeing other examples of what's the difference between written language as a notational system or written language as a discourse style, it's very important to clarify that we are not talking about here is speaking and here is writing, okay? Sometimes when we write, we speak to ourselves and then we have to translate it not only as a notational system, but how we use the written language. With teachers, with Rachel, we have been conducted a lot of workshops with teachers and with speech language pathologies, and I hope I'm not going to say something controversial, but at least in Israel, speech language pathologists don't see themselves as in charge of the written language. And we have to discuss this, and it's not something that we have enough time to discuss now, but try to imagine a session that you are playing with a child about, a very beautiful game or very interesting game, and at some point you're saying, then I will forget how to play with this game, so please, let's write the instructions of the game. From the moment that the child is in need to dictate you the instructions, he should cover all these goals of theory of mind, think about the other one, the next person that is going to read the instructions, and she is supposed to understand from the written text. So we're not talking about working on speaking, working on writing, but we're talking about working in a very interconnected way that take into account that the spoken language differs from the written language. And we have to be very, very aware of these differences because they're not
transparent for the child.
And again, you see that knowing this, you can choose now, when you work with small children, to focus on notations. This is L, this is M, this is, or focus on the concept of writing and leave aside issues that at the moment are not the issue of development. And if you broaden the view and you know that you can choose and you have options, you can now start asking yourself, how is it helpful to think about the discourse style? It is very helpful because this is language. And this is language in different levels, in different ways, to different people that you address the language to. Okay, so now let's see examples.
Yes, what we meant is that you can put an emphasis on written language as a notational system, you can put an emphasis on language as a discourse style. You can be aware of working in parallel, you know, in a interconnected way. So here we have some examples in Hebrew and Spanish and English about invented spelling, which is the first written language that children produce by themselves without being formally taught. So I think that these examples are nice because these two examples you see, they are instructions in a game. The children, two couples of children, you know, pairs of children, were supposed to write the instructions of a ladder game, you know, like
that they invented,
and they were supposed to write stop, move, and jump or something like that, giving instruction. Now pay attention that both examples are in the same kindergarten. Here you see that children almost, they do not differentiate between drawing and writing. And here you already see some letters. It's a syllabic word. You know, they don't use all the conventional letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and of course, but we see that in the same kindergarten we have different attempts of trying to represent the written language as a notational system.
What was nice in this setting is that, for example, they wrote notes for stop and go back and go further, and then they realized that two notes were similar in terms of the number of signs that they put, and they decided to change one of them. Not to because stop and go backward is different. So go backward is longer, so they made it with many signs.
They add more letters.
They add more signs, or yes, no, not exactly letters. Yes, okay.
And also on purpose, we wanted to show also not only how children write small text, but different types of text, different genres. For instance, you see on the right side, it's the index of a cooking book. You know, the children in the kindergarten, they learn how to cook, how to prepare some meals. We invited the community to teach the children how to prepare some foods, and at the end of the school year, they had this cooking book of the most interesting food that they learned during the whole school year. And you can see that children are trying also to deal with language as a notational system and with the written language within the genre of instructional text.
Okay. And one more issue is refers to the invented spelling. It's very interesting to see how much you can learn about the child's knowledge from the products that they do. So, for example, children draw in a certain way, but when they want to write, they do it differently, even though they don't use letters, but they do it differently. And you can see the directions, if they choose to do from the right to the left or from the, and all without letters. It's just experiencing this action of the concept of writing. Okay, so now
But we will not stay there.
Exactly. But we are not going to talk about writing as a notational system. We just wanted you to taste, because it's something really curious to see how children manage with language before being taught. We're going to speak in particular about shared reading. Okay, reading before they are formally taught.
Okay, so shared reading. Imagine shared means there is more than one person, and shared means sharing meanings. Shared mean engagement. All these concepts that were raised previously. So shared reading, this is a specific action between, let's say, a mother and a child, a teacher and a child, a clinician and a child with a child, which is so interesting to see. A space. There is a space created for the development. So you see, the actual setting of shared reading is promoting development of conversational skills and written language as a discourse style. Also as a notational style, but we will not discuss it here, because children are interested in what is written in terms of graphics. So, okay. So what's our argument?
Okay, the main argument is that, I will read it, children's early mastery of conversational and extended discourse skills provides a crucial foundation for the development of literacy, interpersonal negotiation, and academic success. I think that it's a very clear statement. We know that all the experiences children have with books, but not only just because you hold a book, but you talk, you dialogue, you maintain a whole conversation about the text, about the book, the illustration, whatever the notational system, the relationship between illustration and written text, it provides a crucial foundation for the development of literacy itself and negotiation, that we're talking all the time about share attention, share intentions. I just brought this example, and I would like to stay a little bit in this example. I used to have a child that when we read a book, he used to scratch the pages instead of, in a child in the autistic spectrum. He used to scratch the papers or to feel how the papers, you can fold them, instead of turn the pages to read. So it was very difficult to achieve a shared attention of the book. For sure, he was not free to understand what the text was about. So maintaining an interpersonal negotiation meant by that time to wait for the exact time to show the child that you can do other things with the pages than scratching them. Wait to the exact time to point to see if the child, I can catch the shared attention with the child to the book, looking at the same page, looking at the same illustration. Otherwise, you're setting goals which are not appropriate to the developmental stage in which the child is.
So one cannot argue with findings of research. This is a statement which leads to two very important issues. One is, what do we know about shared reading and how does it look like? What happens there? And the second issue is, how do we ourselves get involved in book reading to promote these skills? So what type of skills? We have here two types. Conversational skills refer to the ability to use language in accordance with the context, participants, and the goal of interaction. So when people talk to each other, they have to take into consideration many issues. For example, basic. If I talk, why do you have these earphones? Because some are in a position that prefer to hear Georgian because it's clearer. So when I talk, if I talk now in Hebrew, לא אכפת לי לדבר קצת עברית, אבל אתם לא תבינו שום דבר. taking into consideration the participants means that I have to adapt. Taking into consideration the context, for example, is, as I said, I cannot talk about my personal issues. I'm here to talk about a certain topic. And this is not easy to acquire, because children, it takes time for them to understand. And very often you see that children, you go to the nursery school and children start to talk about their aunt or their mother, and you don't even know the child, and you don't even know why they tell you, but they talk. So these are developmental issues that are very necessary and very important.
And also in the context of shared book reading, again, I really apologize that we are talking about where we are not going to talk, but when we talk about conversation, it means conversation, not taking a book and asking only questions. Because sometimes we translate these conversational skills of shared reading as I'm bringing a book, we are reading, and I'm asking questions to test if you understood the text or not. So conversation means that it two to dance this tango. So speech language pathologists and educators should be very aware of what they bring to the conversation when we're talking about shared reading, because we're in a non-balanced situation where the adult, he knows how to read and you understand better the text, and the child is discovering all the things all together. Written language, discourse styles, notational system, and trying to understand the text by itself. So conversational skills means not only trying to develop the conversational skills of the child, but also be aware of your conversational skills as a professional, either if you're a speech language pathologist or educators. And that's something not so easy to achieve. Okay. And the other aspect is the extended discourse skills, which refer to the ability to construct coherent textual sequences in various discourse styles and genres, which means that the child is supposed to, also by reading, to produce a text, an autonomy text, and which means a text that has a certain internal coherence, cohesiveness in various discourse styles, influenced by the written language and in a variety of genres. And we showed before instructional language, in narratives. Today we are going to talk in particular about narratives, definitions, argumentations. As we saw with Matthew, he was really busy about arguing, stating his argumentation about trying to convince someone to open this cake. Yes.
So when and how does it all start? Now, between the adult and the child, there is a type of contract while reading. And what we would like to talk about is what kind of contract is there in this shared reading? What is the adult's expectation, and what is the child discovering and doing, and how we can promote that and be aware of what can be done in this space.
We'll show first the films.
כן, עכשיו אני רק צריכה להוריד את ה... Just sorry, 1 second, I don't want this to disturb us. Yeah. Okay.
So we would like to show you very short films about what are the contracts of literacy. What you'll understand what's going on here without that this is saying, without is this formulated in an explicit way. I have to walk a lot here.
Yes. Now it will make feedback. Here, but it's...
Yes, you can. I
like to have a microphone of mine.
Okay.
You just need to turn on. Okay.
It will not make feedback? Oh, that's good. Okay. So, we won't hear anything. We will just look and try to identify behaviors that are typical to book reading, and look at the very, very early age that it happens. I love this.
Look at her face.
All right. So we saw the book, shared book reading with babies, very small children, and up to. Okay. So let's now look at the behaviors. Obviously, we see there, say, for example, here, the main thing is pointing, yet we can talk about now, Sima, about the joint attention, engagement, all these concepts that are so important, attunement, that are so important for the development. And just think about this children that Sima spoke without being able to do that, to be involved. This is a type of experience that they lack, which is so meaningful. Okay.
No, I just want to mention that, for instance, we haven't talked about it, but I think it's very important to echo a little bit your presentation about autistic children. We know that autistic children found very difficult to achieve shared attention. And when you want to read something, and we don't care if we are talking about a book, a printed book, or an e-book, an electronic book, you need this shared attention. Now we can, raise our hands and say, okay, we give up. This children has problem with joint attention. We can try again and again in different ways, different strategies, different means to achieve that. And for my experience, it works. It works. And one of the things that Rachel said before is that when we are talking about principles of working with children and share reading books in typical development, they are the same principles with atypical populations. I'm going to say it in a Hebrew translation, we have just to break our head, how to achieve it, but not to put it aside because it's impossible to achieve. For instance, we know in the field of hard of hearing children that it takes to the parents much more time, and the timing and the co-articulation of timing, it's much slower when the child needs to see your hand, in sign language, and then to look back at the book. So it's harder to be achieved, but it is achieved. So we're talking about principles that can be applied also in atypical populations.
Okay. Now look at the setting, the way the mother and the child are sitting. The mother is, in this case, doesn't need the eyes of the child because there's always this feeling that you have to see No, in this case, she is holding the child in a way that she is sure that he is attending to what she is looking at. And here we can see the difference now with the older children. And one very important thing is, what do you know about the book and if you enjoy the book? Because the first thing in shared book reading is that you enjoy the reading as well as an adult. Otherwise, there is no meaning. And you make this situation playful and enjoyable. Otherwise, as Sima said, relationship is the issue. Shared book reading is a content that we talk about, but relationship within that shared reading is very important. So, okay, so here are more examples.
Okay, all right. So now we're going to talk about narratives, but when children encounters a book, you're in a shared reading session, from the moment you see the first page of the cover of the book, you can imagine or figure out, or you can have your assumptions about what the book is about. For instance, what is the book about in the left side? What is it? If you see this illustration, what can be?
What type of book?
What type of book? What
Not
genre? Say it, it's okay.
It's a story.
Narrative, because really dogs, they don't look exactly like this dog, and the facial expression of the dog is not exactly how we, okay, besides my dog, which is very expressive, but this dog, in general, we know that we're talking about a narrative, as if situation. On the other hand, when we bring a book from the book that we see in the right side, we know that we are dealing with an information, yes, an information book. So from the moment we are bringing a cultural material of the society and within a specific genre, we can start making assumptions about the written text and about the particularities of this genre.
And pay attention that these two books are for children. So this is now, we realize that the child is exposed to books, but not only stories. The child is exposed to all types of books. For example, let's see this. We have here, on one side, something which is telling us a story, a book that is with a story, and on the other side, it has to do with the difference between ducks and geese, and geese and goose, and there is an argument if we can differentiate between them, but in these pictures, not really. Okay, another nice example is books that deal with food. This one is a cookbook for children. This one is a story about food, and this one is a picture book, which is very common in early childhood. So a cookbook, now as adults, when you imagine yourself opening it, you are expecting something. You are expecting to see what do they suggest that you make, and recipes, etc., etc. So you have that in mind already. The children discover it. Children discover what type of books exist.
And children discover it through shared reading. You know, when you bring a book like that, you ask the child, what do you think the book is going to be about? How do you know that? What are the signs that make you think in that way? That's the beginning of shared reading, from the moment that you bring the book, even before opening it.
Okay, so now,
let's talk and...
So now, you imagine that a child holds a book. He doesn't recognize the text, the written text. He doesn't know how to read, but he knows something about stories and he knows something about books. So when he meets a book in the first time, he makes assumptions about the content. He looks at the pictures, and he tries to build a story by himself. What we're going to do now is to try this with you. We are going to share some pictures that are taken from this book. The text is in Hebrew, so there is no chance somebody will know what is written. If there is, please don't tell the others. Somebody speaks Hebrew? No? And you, as you see here, write the text of the book. This is including the front page, the title. Write the text of the book and write the strategies you have used to predict the content. Because we want to discover what the child is doing. So take a few minutes, sit with your friends, do it together. You can talk aloud, you can laugh, you can enjoy. We are having a break.
In a sense, since you don't know the Hebrew letters and the Hebrew alphabet, you have to behave like you're pretend reading, okay? Pretend readers.
לא, חייבים
העולם. לא, אבל זה ככה פיקסי, רחל. מההתחלה בסוף, נגיד מה שיש להגיד.
You already wrote several stories, and sure, we need 2 volunteers. So let's start with the first group.
Engagement.
Yes. We would like to have yes.
Do what she said.
We would like to have volunteers reading their product, their story. Here we are.
When we saw the picture, we decided the name of the book is Spider Boo Boo. Spider Boo Boo.
The spider.
And on the first page, there was a spider who is making a web. And the sun was looking at him. The spider continued making the web, and the horse is looking at him. The spider continued, and the horse came and was looking at him and continued like this.
So we are both.
And at the end, no, there is a final picture.
We didn't finish.
Ah, okay, sorry.
ხელმძღვანელობა, რომელმაც გადაწყვეტა, რომ ქსელი მოეცოლა, დილით გაიღვიძა მზესთან ერთად, მიესალმა ძილავშვიდობისა და დაიწყო ზევითხოვით მოძრაობა, მზე შეეკითხა რას აკეთებო. უთხრაობა რომ ქსელს, შუაფრით მოვიდა ცხენი, ცხენმაც კითხა რას აკეთებო. აკურავთ ჩვენ გავუყენეთ ის რუტინულად მეორდება ერთი და იგივე კითხვა, რაც გვაქვს ხელმძღვანელობს ზოგადად დაიმახსოვროს რაღაცეები, განისწავლოს ახალი მისაზრების ფორმები და თანცხოვრები გაეცნოს. საბოლოოდ სამამოსაც დამშვიდობება როგორ დაასრულა თავისი საქმე.
What with the last picture?
ბოლოს ეს არის დამშვიდობების ფორმა და როგორ დასრულდა მისი სამუშაო საბოლოო შედეგი čans სურათზე.
So you were talking in 2 voices. You were talking in 2 voices. One is the story, and the one is the adult.
ანუ ორი პერსპექტივიდან ლაპარაკობ. ერთი არის თვითონ რაც ხდება უბრალოდ და მეორე უფროსის პერსპექტივა. ეხლა ეს ეყვები ამას.
Yes, first of all, thank you for this interesting activity because we were so eager to find out. So our situation happens in farm, it happens during the 24 hours. So in the morning, there was spider, and in the morning, new creature in farm, situation happens in farm, and when in the morning, this spider appears in the new farm where he is new, settlements, and firm animals. So this spider doing some stuff, and everyone was so eager to find out what was going with him, and with each animal there was a fly coming and see what was going with spider.
So you discovered the fly.
Different animals and all that stuff, and at the end, with when spider sews the net, there comes the cock.
Rooster.
And at the time the net is ready, and spider catches it and eats it, but story does not end, and in the night it's turned for all to come and see what happens.
Oh, that's nice. And what is the title of the book? Spider-Man.
Spider in the farm.
Spider in the farm. Spider in the farm. All right. Okay. So let's now start the other thing. So this book is by Eric Carle. We will not talk about the title yet. At the end, we will figure out what it is. And now let's see. So, read it, please.
Read it, yes.
ხელი აბრეშუმივით ძაფი გამოდიოდა მისი სხეულიდან. ობობა ფერმის ღობის კიდეზე დაეშვა. და დაიწყო თავისი აბრეშუმის მაგვარი ძაფის ქსოვა. აჩუ აჩუ თქვა ცხენმა, გავჭენდეთ გინდა?
How do you say? Achu, achu. I just wanted for this time to see how horse behave here.
And now, ask the questions. תעשי demonstration של איזה סוג של שאלות. אני שואלת כי הם לא רואים את הטקסט. Okay. Now.
Now read it.
And what will be written now? Oh.
The spy says.
აჩუ აჩუ თქვა ცხენმა, გავჭენდეთ გინდა?
No, I just wanted to.
ობობა მაროპასუხა, ის ქსელის მოქსოვის იყო დაკავებული.
So what's going on here?
Now?
Oh. Pretend reading, okay? And now this time cows do the same. Moo and moo. No, not nothing different, you know. Moo, what is she going to ask? So really, we discovered that you know how to read in Hebrew also. Because you are now doing pretend reading in Hebrew, okay?
Okay. And now, what will happen? What is going to be the text? Okay.
I'm agree.
But remember, and this is one thing I really want you to remember, these books are good books because some children's books are not good books. This is a good book, so it has to have a turning point. It has to have a turning point. Pay attention. Something should happen here.
Okay, more or less we understand.
Okay. All right, now look at the fly. Look at the way. Where is the fly? Look at the position of the fly in all the pictures, and you can ask the child what does he know about spiders and flies. This is knowledge of the world. It's a dog, it's a cat, it's a goose, geese, duck, whatever. And here it comes. Now what this says, it's different. Okay? And so here is a turning point. This is the end of the story of the fly, because the spider caught it very easily after he was very busy. And now what this one says,
so what's the name of the book?
So what's the name of the book? There? What's the name of the book?
Very hardworking.
The very hardworking.
We have another Hebrew reader. No?
Okay. So it's the very busy spider.
Now, just as small comments, we were trying here for experience. What does it mean to pretend like you're reading? This book is a very, besides that is a good book, it's a very friendly book because it has a certain structure, the dialogues are repeated, but it is a certain challenge for the child, not only because of this place of the fly, which is supposed to make the turning point of the story, but also because probably you see in the Georgian translation, there are a lot of specific actions of the voices of the different animals. You know, children usually use, how does the dog do? Or how do you say it in English? Barking? No, I'm not barking, but the cow, what is doing the cow? Mooing. Oh, okay. I don't know these words in English. So the same is going on with the child. You know, we have to work on the vocabulary. We are using that vocabulary when you read. That's exactly the discourse style, which is more written oriented.
So let's see now what will be the difference in terms of conversation in shared book reading between the book that shows the child ducks and geese and the book that is talking about animals but in a totally different manner. So the opportunities for conversational skills and extended discourse, like asking questions that the child will explain and predict, all this activity can be done in this book with a story. And it's different when the book is for pictures only. Now, what is happening between the adult and the child depends a lot on the adult and depends also on the book. So it's not all the books look alike. In this case, this book is accumulative, so you can predict. It's easier. You come to a point where the child is already saying the same thing and he can say the sentence, and then suddenly it's a surprise, it's not the same sentence anymore. And the child repeated reading, he can take the book by himself, he knows everything, and he can now start reading. And when you let children read, pretend reading, you can discover how they perceive the story, what did they know about the language, how do they predict the content. And it's very interesting to do with them both. Pretend reading by holding the book and reading to their friends, peer interactions in the school or at home to the smaller brother or to the smaller sister. That would be very interesting. And to retell a story. Retell a story when the child is not pretend reading but telling the story, which is also a nice activity for the child. Okay, the Lola. Okay. Okay. So now we only have
yes.
10.
No, we have 10 minutes. We would like also to show you a different type of book, which is a little more challenge from the language point of view and also from how the text is written, the genres that are included in the text. It's not so linear that the other book or so cumulative. Here you have to, it's much more difficult to deal with the text. I have to confess that I use, although I don't like this verb, but I use this book to evaluate children in preschool because it's a very challenged one. So, Nino, can you read it? Okay. Wait. So, in dialogic reading, we can ask questions or comment or say, whoa, who will never, not ever eat a tomato? Who from the two of them is not going to eat a tomato? What do you think? The boy or the girl? Why? How do you know that?
That's amazing.
Because it's a girl? Why do you know? How do you know that?
Exactly.
Say it in English.
It's the tomato and boy is looking at the girl.
Okay. So this kind of question, what do you think the book is about? Who do you think is not going to eat the tomato? How do you know that? That is dialogic reading. We give the children with strategies what to do when you find a text. Strategies which are very known for us, and also we don't think about them because an experienced reader predict before reading the text, deal all the time, negotiate with the text. A non-experienced reader like the children, they need this kind of dialogic reading to approach the text. And look how much information about illustration you get. You know, he is looking at her, that is looking at the tomato. It's very different, they're very more muscal, wise, English. It's a very more intellectual way of looking at the illustration than asking, oh, what's this color, some basic question. Dialogic reading, and also we will say it again and again, you can say it by yourself. I wonder who is the one who is not going to eat the tomato? I think that the girl, because she looks like a little bit, so you can talk aloud, think aloud, so the child can understand how you, an experienced reader, approach the book.
And you can see that theory of mind can be practiced by looking at illustrations. You don't really need to be an interaction in order to infer about what the other character feels, thinks. Okay.
Nina, your turn.
მე ყავს უმცროსი და რომელსაც ლოლა ქვია. ლოლა პატარა და ძალიან სასაცილო გოგონაა. ხანდახან მინდას რომ ყურადღება მივაქციო, ხანდახან ელედა მამამ ხოლმე ვახშამი დავუმზადო და ვაჭამო. ეს ძალიან რთულია. რთულია, რადგან ლოლა წუნია მჭამელია.
Go ahead.
אבל אני צריכה להחליף לה. אני צריכה לדפדף.
ლოლას ათილოს აჭამს, ამბობს ათილო კურდღლების საჭმელია. უხუდო შეჭამ გეკითხები მე.
Okay, so what is Lola going to say now? Is she going to eat the peas? No. She's a fuzzy eater, you know. So when children, they do not know what is a fuzzy eater, this is the time to talk about lexicon, you know. She doesn't want not to eat peas, not to eat carrots. Why?
Because you're not talking.
But they are listening.
They can make inferences from the way she
From the way more, yeah.
Okay.
ლოლა კი მეუბნება, მუხუდოს მართლები ძალიან პატარები და ძალიან მწვანეებიაო. ერთხელაც კარგი რამე მოვუხდი.
So first of all, we have two comments. The one is, what is Lola going to say? You know, I don't eat peas, no peas, shouting, no peas. Is she going to explain why she doesn't like peas? All these kind of questions promotes the use of extended discourse skills, because the child needs to explain, instead of Lola, in the place of Lola, why she doesn't want to eat something. But as every narrative, you have a turning point. So one day I played a good trick on her. So what do you think is going to happen? Do you have some idea? How to convince a child to sample something? I'm not talking about autistic children, but they don't like to.
He will tell her.
Chocolate. He will bring something that she likes and then turns into something.
He will pretend chocolate are peas.
You're answering mommy's, not, let's see what the writer...
He's bigger, I don't know.
Nina, your turn. Lola?
זה כבר עבר לקרות.
Okay. Now the book is a large book, so we picked some pages. So Lola was sitting at the table waiting for her dinner. Lola looked at the table, then, why are those carrots there, Charlie? I don't ever eat carrots. Now wait a minute.
Okay.
We're talking about notational system. Sometimes I ask children, and it's written here, I don't ever eat carrots. So sometimes we ask the children to read, and they read, I don't care ever eat carrots. So what is written here? Again, I don't care ever eat carrots. You know, and you can see how the child is trying to read, to match and to cope with written language as a notational system. So what is Charlie telling her? She doesn't want carrots, so what are, alien people doing here? Jupiter? Okay.
את יכולה לתרגם? אוקיי.
הוא שם מיקרופון סטאפילואה, סטאפילוגיה, רצ'חירביה יופיטרידן. ძალიან გავს სტაფილოს თქვა ლოლა. როგორ შეიძლება რომ სტაფილო იყოს? სტაფილო იუპიტერზე არ იზრდება, უთხარი მე. ხო, მართლა დამეთანხმდა. შეიძლება ერთი დავსვიჩო, თუ იუპიტერიდან არის. გემრიელი ხალხობამ და კიდევ მოხდა.
Okay, you're not going to the activity because we have no time. But I want to share with you some. When then Charlie is going to convince her to eat peas, of course he's inventing a whole story that they are not peas, they're candies that they came from Antarctica and they are made from something very special. So, apropos theory of mind, I asked one of the children, she's a language impaired child, preschool child. So at some point after reading 2 or 3 times the same book, I asked her, now this time Charlie is trying to convince Lola to eat whatever, peas. So what do you think he's going to say her, to tell her? And she said, you don't eat peas, no TV. So that's, what does it mean share reading? Okay, that's probably what your mommy says to you or what you think it is going on in your house. What do you think Charlie is going to tell Lola? What do you think he's going to explain? Because we have different genres here connected, explanations and narratives and very imaginative stories, okay?
Let me just show you the last thing. We studied, we told children to do pretend reading, and we recorded it and transcribed, and look what happens here. Quack, quack, said the goose. Quack, quack, honked the duck. What goose? Goose. It's called duck. Goose. It is called goose and duck. Quack, quack is the sound of the duck, but this is a goose, right? This is what happens when children meet some difficulties or mistakes that somebody says and the other one's corrects. The dialogic reading is also between peers, and it's very interesting to let them experience dialogic reading both with adults and with children. Okay.
We have a panel now, so it's okay.
Small question. I will try to. I have a question about the tomatoes.
The
tomato in the book?
It is.
Yes.
It is. Yes.
So they are thinking about some story.
No.
Tomato.
Real tomato.
Yes.
Yes.
Every time that she doesn't want to eat something, and it's a whole story about it's not the real thing, but it's something else. But at some point, she is tricking him. She says to him, what do you think, I'm going to eat a tomato? That's whatever. I don't remember because it's in English. I don't remember the words in English. But just read the book.
Okay.
And every time he has to make some story, I mean, lie.
It's not lying, it's as if. Yeah. Pretend. It's not a tomato. Pretend something else.
So every
okay?
time when she refuses to eat something,
he's inventing a story, whole story.
And you can use this with children, like every
Complete.
Every...
Exactly. Okay, so I think that here you have a very, very, very short, summarize of part of the strategies we have used here, such as thinking aloud, open-ended inferential questions, literal questions, trying to predict in different parts, not only at the beginning when we see the cover of the book, but what will happen next. And that encouraged dialogue, dialogic reading. Now I think that it will be nice if you will have time to ask some questions, okay?
Could you please share some of your favorites?
No, wait.
Could you please share some of your favorite authors? Carl and
this. I purposely left this picture because it is an amazing book, which is called.
It's a
now
picture
this
book.
whole story just describes Rosie the hen walking and in the picture you can see the wolf trying in all type of ways to catch her, but there is no text there. There is no text, and we made a small research to see what children do when they see that there is a difference between the text. We made a small study to investigate what do children do when they see that there is a difference between what the mother reads and what's happening in the picture. Now, at the age of 4, before that nothing happened, they just followed what the mother said. At the age of 4, they started telling the mother, listen, you forgot to talk about, you forgot to read about the fox. Which means that they get so much information from the pictures, illustrations.
მამის შესახებ, რომელიც გამოსახული არ მოგიძებდა, ის ვიყვება, რომ ყავს დედა, არის ისტორია, საერთოდ იმ მომენტისთვის არის აქტუალური. ამ დროს პედაგოგისთვის რა რეკომენდაცია გაქვს, ანუ რა შეიძლება გააჩეროს და გააჩეროს ყურადღება ისეთ თუ მისცეს საშუალება, რომ განავითაროს თავისი მეწყვილება იმ ფორმას, როგორც მას სწავლობს.
Nina, I didn't understand the question.
Was the question clear?
Yes. I didn't understand the question.
You understand?
No, I didn't.
Actually, when you're reading 2 or 3,
yes,
let's
and they're talking about personal
child,
issues.
You ask what do you think about tomato, and she or he answers something about his mother. So, from his perspective, should we return his focus to tomato, or should we follow?
I would like to refer to that from 2 aspects. One is that obviously children always talk about themselves. They are the center of the world, and it is something that is encouraged, and of course, and unless it is hurtful for them, but which is a different issue. I'm talking about typical, not with problems. So personal issues are raised all the time, and how to handle them is a developmental issue. One thing that you see, if you talk in a Piagetian concept, is decentration. So the child is able slowly to take himself to do decontextualization of personal issues and to be able to refer to the characters and to whatever is happening in the book as different from him. This is a developmental procedure, but there is a whole area which I really love, which is bibliotherapy, in cases where children do have emotional problems, and then professional people use books for that purpose, so that the child can have empathy to or say possess some of the things, or feel, how do you say it, for God's sake, that the child is identify himself with the characters, and then the therapist helps him slowly to go through the experience and to get free from that bad feeling that he has, and then to decontextualize himself from the character.
I would like to add that, now I push.
Okay. You know, your question is one of the $1 million questions in intervention. What to do, what not to do. Okay, but you have to think about yourself as someone who wants to interfere. It doesn't mean that you have to say something or to do something. Sometimes to interfere is just to let the child to tell the story again and again from his point of view. And then saying, you know, that's an interesting story, but let's see what the writer wrote here. Let's see what happened between Charlie and Lola, not between you and your mommy. So These kind of questions, we talked before about shared meanings, but we have to also talk about negotiating shared meanings. And also negotiating shared meanings is something that you have to take into account the complexity of the book, which I'm not sure I will read this Charlie and Lola book to a 2-year-old child. For sure, also from the linguistic point of view, it will be very difficult for him to make a really long stretch of talk as an explanation, as if it's something different. So you have to take into account developmental issues where the child has, but not least important, your place in their interaction. What are you bringing there, you know? And I think that's the answer for the question, okay? Of course.
So, yes. Everything that's been said, but I think it also goes back to, and this is something that's such a complex issue, where are we in the intervention process, right? So is that the first day the child read the story with you? Is that the 10th time the child read the story with you? And the other part is, what goals have you decided you're focusing on by reading the book together? So for example, if it was, I'll just make this up, what if it was a child who you wanted him to talk more about his own life, right? You wanted him to. So you would say, you're just like Lolo. You don't like tomatoes. You and Lolo, or whatever her name was.
Lola, yes.
Yes, Lola. You're the same. You don't like tomatoes, right? So if it was like an emotional, goal to help the child talk about himself and his emotions, then I would go off, to that. If it's a different kind of goal at a different developmental stage. So I think every question, as Sarah said, what do you do, what do you don't do, if that's English, is where are you in the developmental process and which of the goals are you focusing on? When people work in a more naturalistic way, whether it's play or books or whatever, this is a question that comes up all the time. It doesn't matter what context you're using. You must know your goal. So if Matthew comes in and talks about the skate park, he comes in and talks about a fight with his brother, I have the same goals. I'm trying to work on his formulation and his theory of mind. So whatever's going on there, that's the goal, right? I think that's very important. It just means there's no answer to any question about intervention except as it applies to a particular child.
როგორ იმოქმედა მაგალითად ჩვენი ჯგუფის შემთხვევაში წიგნის ნაბეჭდი ტექსტის მახასიათებლების ცოდნა იმაზე გავლენა თუ როგორ მოთხრობას მოვიკონებდით, იმიტომ რომ მაგალითად ქართულში ტექსტი არ ეხება მარცხნიდან მარჯვნივ, ანუ არ ვისწრაფ ასე კითხვას, არც ალბათ ამ შემთხვევაში პირიქით ხდებოდა თუ ჩვენთვის ჯერ იყო პირველი მოქმედება, შემდეგ იყო მეორე. ანუ სრულიად სხვა რამ მოვიკითხეთ და ძალიან კარგი მაგალითი იყო ამის
I complain that you staple the book not in the same. I tried to open the pages and I couldn't open because the staple was in the other side. So I told Tina, you are stapling it in the other side. So it's not surprising that you discover this directionality of the Hebrew language by experiencing it. And that's exactly what we're talking about pretend reading. That's why we wanted you to formulate what's going on in the group while discovering what is written there. That's exactly the point. Wait.
პერსონაჟები ხალხია. ხოდა მე მაინტერესებს ახლა ასეთი გზავნილები შევარჩიოთ ეს წიგნი, სადაც მივცეთ ბავშვს მაგალითად გაუგებარი სურათი და მივცეთ საშუალება რომ თვითონ აღწეროს რას ხედავს და მივცეთ გასახანის ფანტაზიისკენ, თუ უფრო შევარჩიოთ ისეთი წიგნები, რომელიც შეესაბამება რეალობას, ანუ ხასანი ხასს გავს, ადამიანი ადამიანს გავს. ანუ ეს ასაკზეა დამოკიდებული თუ უფრო უნდა შევარჩიოთ რაც რეალობა შეესაბამება. ძალიან ბევრი წიგნია მაგალითად სპანჯბობი, რომელიც რობელი ცხოვრობს ზღვაში. არიძირება და ასე შემდეგ. ანუ ეს არის ცოტა არაბუნებრივი რაღაცეები. აი ამ შემთხვევაში მაინტერესებს როგორ უნდა მოხდეს წიგნის შერჩევა.
You want to add?
Wow. You said $1 million.
You want to ask? Okay, I will. First of all, I'm not an expert in children literature. I can also answer from my point of view of working with educators, working by myself, and working with speech language pathologists. So first of all, I'm not so sure that they are, easy books or difficult books. Sometimes we make the books easy or difficult, It's not so, dichotomy. When you are talking about, for instance, a caterpillar that really looks as a caterpillar, you are putting aside all the narratives, because Eric Carle, the same person who wrote The Very Busy Spider, he wrote a very famous book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, that was translated maybe even in Georgian. This particular caterpillar, it eats everything. Ice cream, pizza, whatever you want. And we know that caterpillars in the real world, they don't eat everything. They eat leaves from,
We should show them George.
So on purpose, I will show the child a narrative book and an informative book, so you can gain information about how caterpillars behave in the world without being frightened or without doing forbidden to yourself to expose the children to variety, because children learn from this variety. We learn from these different genres. We learn to differentiate. If we only focus only on one genre, and we are afraid of bringing something where SpongeBob looks different, so I think, in my opinion, that we less produce contradictions, and contradictions sometimes help us to understand better the world. That's not me. That's saying Piaget says that, that when you have a sort of contradiction, you are trying to balance again your thought and to arrive to conclusions, because you have different, for instance, the SpongeBob, a real one, and the SpongeBob in the TV. That's my beliefs, my educational and interventional beliefs.
I can add to that. First of all, it is such an important question. And if I rephrase it, how do you choose a book for children? What are the criteria? Are there criteria? How do you build a library in the kindergarten? Because these processes are not to be taken as simple ones. There are good books, there are different books, there are very didactic books, there are books that are targeted to specific issues. So the variety is very wide, and the one thing which is important is, once you decide that books are important for you to work with children and then your knowledge has to widen, your experience, yourself. You have to go to bookshops and start reading children's books. And then you develop, together with the children, you develop this sensitivity of what suits them. And how do you handle that? What's happening to you when you read the books? But one thing is for sure. Children develop And they can meet the book, which at the beginning looks very complicated, and then they take what they take. And in time, they come back to the book and they see other things. And if you follow the child by repeated reading through time, you will see that you learn from the child how to read it to him. So as Sima said, it is very particular.
აინტერესებს უცხოების როლი მეტყველების განვითარებაში, ისე როგორც სამიზნეს ასეთი ბავშვებთან დაკავშირებით, მაგალითი არის ბავშვების ცხოვრებაში ძალიან ინტენსიურად შემოდის უცხო ენაზე მუსიკა და ისინი ხშირად აზროვნებენ ან აქვს წინადადებები უცხო ენაზე და ამავდროულად როცა ესაუბრებენ მშობლიურ ენაზე როგორც გამოყოფა. ან მათლობა უჭირთ თავის მშობლიურ ენაზე. ან როგორ გამოცდილება
It's a question for a whole day conference. So if you want to eat, because we share the same thing in Israel, we also have foreign languages and we ask the same questions. And the bottom line at the moment is that exposing children to more than one language is very beneficial, cognitively, communicatively, and linguistically. So that's the bottom line of this whole day.
Thank you.